Hey, everybody. Patrick Connor here. Welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Man, we're doing more boxing history. That means I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, CompuBox operator and fellow fight history freak. Bro, how are you?
Doing good, man. I got a new shirt in today, so I'm feeling happy.
Dude, that's pretty much like several days a week for you. So that's not even like, but still, that's a fucking dope shirt, man.
Absolutely.
Dude,
And we had a good weekend of fights. Just to reference that really quick, you know what I mean? Bam Rodriguez once again proved he's a star in the making, if not a star already. And yeah, there's actually going to be a low this weekend, I think, right? And I don't think there's anything coming up.
yeah, nothing major, I don't think. I'd have to
It's
look
the Fourth of
again.
July weekend too. I think they'd be foolish
Yeah.
right
Well,
around that.
man, I'm not gonna lie, dude. Sometimes I lose track as far as like the contemporary boxing when it's like it's been so good that it's been so frequent. Every so
Mhm.
often when there's a lull, it's almost like take a breath, man. It's good. But Bam Rodriguez, absolutely, I think spectacular is a word that's getting thrown around a lot, but it's probably warranted in this case, dude. He absolutely ran Sri Saket Surungvisai all around the ring and then just beat the hell out of him in the last round and a half or so. So I mean, it was a beatdown, and it was an extremely good showing for a really young fighter.
He's awesome, man. For his age too. You know what? I was texting my buddy about this earlier that he was born when I was in high school, when you were in high school. You know what I mean? And he's a world champion now. And it's kind of like, damn, we're getting old. Like, so little things start hitting you at that point.
Yeah, no
Because what
shit.
he was born in 2000, right? And when you think about it, 2000 was 22 years ago, or he was in 2000, right? Am I correct?
Something, yeah. Well, I graduated in 2000, so anywhere around there.
Yeah,
Point
I
is,
graduated 03. So it's
yeah,
kind of like anything around then. You think about that time period. It doesn't seem that long ago, but it is. But it's like,
fuck.
regardless, a person that young with that maturity, bro, the way he moves, his angles, you see the shades of Orlando Canizales, you see the maturity in him, the poise, dare I say, like of Salvador Sanchez. I'm not reaching too hard. I'm just saying like examples of things and like just the just his whole package right now at that age, man. He's very mature for his age and the way he fights, dude. That's a prodigy right there. You know what I mean? And as our friend Corey Erdman mentioned earlier in his article for Boxing Scene, um, he has the potential to be the next big star at that division, the likes of for the US, the likes we haven't seen since the days of Johnny Tapia, Danny Romero. You know what I mean? He's showing that type of potential. But who knows where he's going to go from here? It's already been said that it would have to be a last resort for him to fight Chocolatito because they both were under the Titan label and they're like brothers, and he just wouldn't want to do that. Totally understandable. Estrada has his own business with going up with Chocolatito coming up again. So that's kind of annulled at the moment. So with that being said, he said he might be looking to go back down eventually.
I was just about to say, with all the weight moving around on his part, I don't even know where he's destined to land as far as division. In that regard, the options seem pretty wide open, which is fantastic and really cool to think about, and all the mythical matchups and the potential things to put him in, with, or the opponents to put him in with over the next few years, assuming he stays winning and stays doing his thing, which it sounds like, it sure seems like he probably will, based on the stuff you just said, because he seems very poised, very complete as a fighter. One of the things that you see, even from high level fighters, even from fighters who are world class, world ranked, it's something you see from fighters on that level a lot. They smother their own work,
Mm.
even when they're precision punchers, good punchers, whatever. In terms of footwork and in terms of positioning, they smother their own work constantly. And something that is really difficult to do is that kind of like find that optimal distance for a fighter and stay at that distance. That's something that Chocolatito, for instance, is extremely good at.
Totally.
And I think that, kind of like drawing on that comparison, you see what Bam Rodriguez did against Sri Saket Sorongvisai, and then you see what Chocolatito did against him. And it's first of all, I think that we both thought Chocolatito won the first fight, like narrowly, but won it because he fought his fucking ass off, and I think we both thought he deserved that decision. But the second fight, obviously, there's no arguing anything. But in both fights, what we saw with Chocolatito, a big difference was that he threw like everything he had at Sarong Visai, who just absorbed it. He just didn't move. And so, I mean, I think that it was, and on top of that, with Chocolatito having already gone up X amount of divisions, it's like, you know, you can't move like that naturally at that weight, or, you know, Chocolatito, that is, for that many rounds and not tire out, which is pretty much what happened in the rematch. You know, like he couldn't sustain that. And everybody thought he was done. And to his credit, he's still around and still a goddamn beast. And I mean, when that guy comes up on the Hall of Fame ballot, I'm gonna fucking rent a jet powered fucking air glider like Fan Man and just trapeze my vote right onto Canastota, right with that shit in my hand, like, woo, fucking Chocolatito. Because that guy's
There's no way
badass.
he's not going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
100%. But that's a big difference, I think, between, you know, a lot of X factors with Chocolatito's age, him moving up in weight already, et cetera, against Sorong Visai. But then also, to be fair, that was a couple of years ago. And Sorong Visai has been somewhat inactive since, and has lost a few times in really difficult fights too since. So those things don't just happen in a vacuum. Those things do count. And that's not to take anything away from Rodriguez, because he put the nail in the proverbial coffin. You know, he beat the crap out of Sorong Visai.
And it was the way he did it, man. It was like, Sorong Visai is one of the toughest guys on the planet. That's undoubtedly so. He's proved his mettle time and time again. But no one, I don't think he's ever encountered a style like that. You know what I mean? You could totally see he was absolutely bewildered. Like, not only did he have 1,000 punches coming at him in every direction, even though he did outthrow Bam Rodriguez. I was doing the compy box for that fight, and he narrowly outthrew him. But I mean, he was getting a flurry of shots. It was the angles that it was coming from. You know what I mean? That's what it was. Like, so
he was stepping around and
around the lane. He was coming with the uppercuts and the hooks and the jabs because he jabbed the shit out of him. You know, and coming with the other shots and pot shot and going to the body. What you do? Like, it was just a beautiful. Everything was just emotion. And like you said, obviously Sorong Visai has is a little past his prime, lost a little bit of his step, considering, like, you know, he's not the same force that was fighting with Chocolatito in their first fight at the Garden, or, you know, knocking the hell out of him in the rematch. Hell, this wasn't even the one that fought Estrada the 2 times, but it was still a very formidable fighter who would have given anyone else fits, if not outright beat them that night. Even certain instances in the fight, Rodriguez is there dominating, and he was never really out of control. But Sorong Visai did land some shots to show that he was just still an incredibly brute force. Like, at one point, if you notice, they exchanged jabs, and Rodriguez hit him, and Sorong Visai didn't move. Sorong Visai hits him with a jab, and Rodriguez visibly, his head moved back, his whole body was like kind of moved back from that. And it's that physical strength of the dude, man. Those tree trunk
bruiser, dude.
A bruiser, yeah. But he could never get, you know, he was never able to get tracked. And that's what he needs. He never was able to get into a rhythm because Rodriguez didn't let him. You know, Bam just moved around the angles, the Lomachenko like style for more modern people, the kind of like the footwork was just superb. Again, like it was in the Quadras fight. The placement of his punches, everything had a purpose for it. It wasn't just wasted energy, you know, like the maturity level we were talking about. He's a special talent. But you know, again, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes from here. He mentioned that he wants his brother to fight Estrada or Chocolatito so they can, like, you know, kind of make history together and stuff. But again, we'll see where he ends up. Robert Garcia, his trainer, had mentioned that he was hoping to go down to 112 eventually again. So there's a lot of options for him. He's only 22. Like, the sky's the limit for this kid, man. I'm not sure if he's like on the pound list yet, as a lot of people were like talking about earlier. Besides, I think those are always stupid. But I will say he's obviously going to be a leader in the sport for years to come, along with Shakur Stevenson, Boots Ennis, and, you know, a handful of others.
If he really can safely move around weight-wise like that, then okay.
He says he can. I mean, you know, 115 to 112 isn't that much of a difference. Going back to 108 might be a little bit much.
Yeah, and like I said, if it's safe for him to do that, or if he can do it effectively or whatever, cool. And that's just, I guess, one more kind of wrinkle to his game or whatever, being able to kind of move up or down in that regard. So that's pretty wild, dude, because in the last, gosh, I mean, 15 years or so, we've really seen some incredible, maybe even 20 years, we've seen some incredible, like right around flyweight action. I mean, going back even farther, really, it's been a division that has delivered as far as entertainment and talent for literally forever. And it's an extremely deep division historically. So, I mean, I'm all for it, dude. I love it. Anything to add to it. And it's really great to see in the last handful of years, partially starting with Chocolatito as far as this kind of resurgence with the lower weight fighters. It's
Totally.
really great to see him get some pay and get some shine.
Oh, absolutely, man. It took forever for them to, really get prominence on television and get some traction going. As we mentioned, excuse me, as we mentioned before about like Danny Romero and Johnny Tapia, they were the first to be really featured on prominent television like HBO um, in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, because they were obviously on a collision course with each other. And Romero was the one that was being more groomed for superstardom because he was the one, like more clean cut. He had kind of like the De La Hoya type looks and spectacular power, top rank full behind him. They were behind Tapia too, but Romero was the guy that was being pushed as like the future star. He was the one that got first on HBO, the first flyweight to be featured on HBO. One was when he beat Francisco Tejedor on the undercard of George Foreman, Axel Schultz, and he was being groomed for stuff. But by the time Tapia beat him in that big fight, Tapia kind of took that mantle. But again, it is still they after they both went away, it petered off too. Mark Johnson, one of the most talented flyweights, junior bantamweights the world has ever seen. Same thing. He never really was able to get a chance to get on, major television like that. Like he was featured on ESPN against Arthur Johnson. He had a couple other times he was featured on ABC and such, but one of those premium slots on HBO Boxing After Dark, for instance, or World Championship Boxing, it never happened. That was talked about. It was rumored every time you'd see it every few months in Ring Magazine or KO Magazine. They would say Mark Johnson scheduled to fight so and so on HBO Boxing After Dark, and for whatever reason, it didn't take off. Then he went to jail for a little bit, came back, finally was featured on HBO, and he was clearly past his best at that point. So, like you said, now with Chocolatito and the rest of his comrades, I'm not going to call them kings because I hate that term. They were able to take that mantle, and it was beautiful to see. Superfly, the things that are featured on HBO, and they've been prominent ever since then. I'm glad the world's being able to take notice with that as well.
Yeah, dude, it's cool because they've deserved it, man. We've deserved it. Damn it,
Yes,
we need to see that shit.
absolutely, man.
We've
Especially in
talked.
the days when before they were really featured. So we're talking like the early 2000s, and when YouTube was in its infancy. That was really the only time, unless you were a tape trader, you were
And we
able
were
to see
only ever
fights like
reading about these
Chocolatito and those
fools,
guys.
a
Yeah,
lot of them.
all of them. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it's really good to see somebody like a Jesse Rodriguez get some play, get some get some attention and get
Totally.
some airtime, because we should be seeing a lot of those fighters. And it's like, there have been a lot of more mainstream people who've criticized lower weights in the past, and they were wrong. Flat out, they were wrong. So yeah, regardless though, a lot of fun this past weekend, and we are here to talk about history though, dude. And we're gonna revisit. We're gonna have a part two soon of talking about the Kronk fighters, doing another kind of true crime episode. It seemed a lot of people enjoyed that, and it brought back some good kind of late 1970s, early 1980s memories. But we're gonna switch it up just a little bit this week, and we're talking about when trash talk goes wrong in boxing. It's always fun, right, man? It's going to be
Always.
funny, fun, entertaining.
Can't beat that type of stuff, man. I mean, we always love trash talkers. We did a show on trash talkers because they're always entertaining guys. But when when karma comes to hit these dudes in the ass,
It
there's usually
happens.
better. Yeah, it's nothing better.
Yeah, I mean, they're with so many like potential variables in like every fight in boxing, with the old kind of like, anything can happen. Like that's always, in just about any fight ever, anything can happen. obviously to varying degrees, right?
Totally.
But eventually somebody is going to talk some trash. They're always for years saying, oh, it's a gentleman's sport and blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, drama draws attention, and attention means money. So, at various points in history, drama and shit talk and whatnot have been encouraged, maybe on the down low or behind the scenes from promoters, but to all the writers or whomever, they're going, whoa, 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 guys, no, come on, we don't do this here. This is not this sport. When in reality, like that, totally this sport. That's been the entire time we've done this shit. So in any case, it's bound to happen sooner or later, and we're talking about all of the sooner and later today. There's so many examples.
Tons of them, man. You can go all the way back from the beginning of time all the way till today. Like there's always been like a list of like famous trash talkers, a lot of bullshit artists, all that other stuff. One of my all-time favorites, and because my dad used to talk about him a lot when I was a kid, and this is from my dad's era when he was a kid, because my dad comes from the Joe Louis era, actually. He used to tell me about how he would listen to Joe Louis fights on the radio with my grandfather. So that kind of gives you an idea of how old my dad is. I'm not going to give out his age, but it's yeah. So who I'm referencing is of course everybody's favorite fat barroom brawler, 2-ton Tony Galento.
What a legend, dude! What a
Really
legend,
was, man.
So like I don't know how you can necessarily verify it, but they've said for years that there were a handful of fights where he carried beer to his corner and had beer in his corner in place of water. I have no idea how he'd really, be getting away with that, because I would imagine that, commissions existed at this point. It's not like there was some Wild West shit going on in Jersey and New York, but there were reports at the time that he had brought beer, and because he was a saloon keeper, he was a barkeep, and so he had owned a bar, and I want to say it was Orange, New Jersey, or something like that. And so that's where
Orange, New Jersey, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's where he was always hanging out, and he, openly did not like to train very much. Was a big drinker. Always had a cigar in his mouth, and he basically looked like me, more or less. The guy was just, he was bald, and he was hairy and not in good shape whatsoever. But he was underrated in the skills department. He was better than he looked, but he was still clumsy. However, he could punch.
Clumsy's putting in, like, yeah, he was awkward. He was very awkward and very clumsy. Not what you would call a stylist in the sense at all. But he was fun to watch, man. He did not care about the rules. All right, everything was a street fight to him.
Against like a really polished style, he was going to look like shit. Like against somebody who's like really straight up and like, is not like falling for that shit, he's going to look like shit. But, as we've seen so many times before, sometimes that really ambling style can be more effective than you think.
He had good wins on his ledger too, on the way to fighting Lewis, like Nathan Mann, for instance, who fought Lewis and a host of others. And he all right, the best way to put it, maybe if you want to describe him, he was like someone kind of modern, maybe like Tank Abbott. What'd you think?
Yeah, that's not bad. That's true. Yeah.
Think about it. They both, Abbott was probably in better shape than Galento, if that means much, but like they had similar body types. Both were ridiculous punchers. Both looked like they had no business being in there with polished guys who knew what they were doing. But if they were able to, land their haymaker, which usually they're able to at some point, they would put you to sleep, or they would maul you or do serious damage to you.
Yep.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually there are actually some really funny things too, especially because like so Tony Galento, however it's pronounced, was known for referring to damn near everybody as a bum.
Everybody.
Whatever, like if whatever fighter it was, like, oh, that bum, this bum, that guy, this bum, that type of shit. And at the time, in like the 1930s, I mean, you can probably get an idea from movies like The Cinderella Man, is in inaccurate as that shit was when it came to a lot of the boxing quote unquote facts. Nonetheless, some of the background was pretty accurate as far as the Depression era and the way people were having to live and get by. And so a lot of that kind of talking in places like Jersey and New York was considered like lower class. Like if you were talking with that real thick, heavy accent, you were considered kind of lower class. And so here you have Tony Galento run around, just, you know, he's got the thickest accent to the point where just about any time you see quotes from him, it's in that like phonetic, stylized, like text where it's like you can barely read it because it's like this guy's over here and shit like that, you know. And so in any case, one of his most epic trash talk was obviously against Joe Louis, because he's calling Joe Louis a bum, and obviously
Exactly.
Joe Louis was not a bum. But there was
I'm gonna moiter the bum. I'm gonna moiter the bum.
yeah, I'm moited a bum. Shakespeare was that bum. I don't know, but I'm moited him. That type of shit. And so like a couple weeks or a month or so before the Lewis fight, and it was right before, as they're doing introductions for Lou Nova versus Max Baer 1 at Yankee Stadium. It was in June of 1939. Tony Galento and Lewis, they're being introduced. And if you've seen the old fight broadcast, which I know you have, but anybody listening or watching, if you've seen the old broadcast, you know that the old fighters being introduced or other fighters being introduced in the ring, that's a normal thing. It happened all the time. But Nova Baer 1 is particularly significant because it was the first major fight to be televised in the United States. And funnily enough, as Galento and Lewis are being introduced to each other, Lewis is walking into the ring and Tony like sprints, like falls all over himself to like help Lewis through the ropes, and then sits there shaking his hand for like 5 minutes straight. Lewis is like looking at him like, dude, let go of my fucking hand. Like, and you could tell that like Tony's just like, you know, saying some shit to him, and you can't say you in whatever. And Lewis kind of turns around and he salutes Max Baer, salutes Lou Nova, says hello to everybody. And Tony sprints back to him and grabs his hand again to like shake it and talk to him. And he's like sitting there for like ever. Dude, it's the funniest shit. So obviously the trash talk, a lot of it was just a show, because it seemed like he was saying probably something like, hey, don't take the shit personal. Or it seemed like he was obviously showing him respect, you know, in the way that he was acting. But he went
Lewis
right back
kicked the
to,
shit out of him, man.
oh my God, dude. It's a 4-round. I don't know that I've seen in a 4-round fight
Someone get drubbed the way he did.
I mean, he's already an ugly bastard. He already looks like a ghoulie. You know, you remember the ghoulies. He already looks like a ghoulie. Yeah. And this dude looks just like terrible, beaten up sack of suds at the end of the fight, dude. He looks awful in 4
Dude, he
rounds.
looks like a water bag. It sounds like Lewis is hitting a water bag at the end, just douche, douche, douche. And you can't move. You know, he was dangerous early on. He actually landed, he dropped Lewis. He had a dangerous left hook. And him being so unorthodox and just wild and, you know, very strong physically himself, he unnerved a lot of boxers, including Lewis early on. Lewis had to, like, you know, catch his composure, and while hitting him with numerous combinations, had to brace himself for whenever he was going to get bum rushed with some wild shit that Galento was going to throw. And yeah, man, it was just a 4-round drubbing. All right. The likes the world hadn't seen at that point. The last time they had probably made them get flashbacks to Jess Willard, Jack Dempsey.
That's good. Yeah, that's true. Well, Lewis hit the deck in, I think it was the third, but it was brief, and he was okay. But again, like we said, the dude could punch. The guy and Joe Louis was fairly flat-footed. He didn't move super great. He didn't move his head that well either sometimes. So sooner or later, he's going to get hit, regardless of who it is. And Galento could punch. So it's not, you know, a wonder that he hurt him at all. But nonetheless, again, within a round, he had beaten the ever-loving shit out of this guy to the point where he was like falling into the ropes and the referees stepping in like, wow, please stop. There was people yelling ringside like to stop the fight, you know, stop it, stop
Oh
it.
yeah.
It's a fucking massacre, dude.
But you have to. I'll give Galento this, man. As bad as he took an ass whooping in that fight with Joe Louis, his very next fight was against the guy you just mentioned, who was fighting Max Baer, Lou Nova. And to say that is one of the most worst muggings in boxing history would be an understatement. And the thing is, a lot of people probably don't even know about it. You know what I mean? If you're not like a major history person or really read up on this type of thing, it ended up being one of the worst, most just absolute. It was a street mugging. It wasn't even a boxing match. And poor Lou Nova was absolutely ruined in the fight. Lou Nova was a very talented heavyweight, a very eccentric heavyweight.
Cosmic punch.
Yeah, Cosmic punch. Practiced yoga, did a bunch of other stuff that was very uncommon for the time period, but. He'd be popular today because, like I said, he
had a good team. He had Ray Arcel.
Did, and he was a very good fighter. Despite his quirkiness, he was a very good fighter, and one that you described more so in the classic sense than certainly someone like Galento. But Galento was that type of guy that if you couldn't hold him off, and for all of his out of shapeness or whatever, besides him being able to wield a good left hook, he could really, really, really take punishment. Like, it was going to be hard to put him down. Lewis is the exception. Lewis is probably the greatest puncher in boxing history. Galento is a hard man.
Yeah, falling against not only Joe Louis, but a Joe Louis who looked pissed and who was just like, in that fourth round when he was ending the fight, he was throwing punches like.
And this was still the 30s too. This wasn't like, you know what I mean? This was still young Joe Louis out there, pissed before the war and everything else. So
he was throwing punches like he really wanted to hurt him.
And he did. And he certainly did. So with that being said, if you weren't able to hold off, like Joe Louis, if you weren't able to hold off someone like that, Galento, then Galento was going to have free reign on you. Poor Lou Nova wasn't able to do that. And Galento, besides punching once in a while, everything in the arsenal, man, probably even like made Fritzy Zivic to shape that night. I'm talking kicks, elbows, knees, laces, headbutts, probably biting, gouging, everything you can imagine that you could do in a fight, Galento got away with. And the referee, George Blake, who had a good reputation before that fight, didn't do shit. Just absolutely didn't do anything and just kind of let it go on. And it was a massacre. It was an absolute massacre that had no business going on. And everyone at that time period was like appalled. We're talking like some gory TVMA type stuff went on that fight.
Yeah, these fools were like dining with rats.
Yeah.
And they're like, stop the fight.
It was bad. It was like Galento
living among gore. And they're like, this is too much for us.
They probably should have stopped. Like Galento probably should have been disqualified multiple times, or the fight should have been stopped earlier. But like Nova was just a wreck. It was bad, and he was a good dude and a good fighter, and no one deserves a beating like that.
Dude, Galento was just an all-time character for sure. I'm not saying everything he did was good or great or anything, but definitely in terms of just being a fucking character, man, no question. And you know what? Actually, there's another anecdote about this guy, 2-Ton Tony, that this trash talk almost went wrong for him, even against a well-retired Jack Dempsey, believe it or not. And funnily enough, a couple of years before this, Jack Dempsey was still doing exhibitions. And he was in fighting shape damn near his entire life. So shit, dude, Tony might have been lucky that Dempsey didn't give him the old what for, because fucking apparently Tony Galento confronted Jack Dempsey at the photographer's ball in 1939 and basically got into his face and asked why he'd been talking shit. And according to reports, he said, "You big tramp, why do you go around the country knocking me? What did I ever do to you? I'll knock that Lewis into your lap. I at least fight colored fighters, something you were afraid to do. You ducked Harry Wills for years." And I read that and I was like, holy shit, he said that in Jack Dempsey's face. And apparently, yeah. And apparently, not only did Jack Dempsey not do shit, Jack Dempsey basically said bullshit. And if you knock Lewis out, I'll give you $5,000.
Okay.
And obviously that didn't
I
happen.
bet you Dempsey even knew too that he might have been, I don't know, Galento might have been a little too rough for him.
That's probably why he offered him the $5,000.
Yeah, man. But well, before we move on, I'll give you one more, and you probably know the story. A young Jackie Gleason talked the story one time that he said he was doing a stand-up comedy somewhere or whatever, and there was a drunk guy in the audience that kept on heckling him, and he was getting pissed off because the guy kept on every time he tried to make a joke, whatever, he kept on getting interrupted, you know. And Gleason, who obviously went on to become a legend in the field, at this point he was still young and he was in shape, and he was pissed off. You know, I'm sure he'd been in a few dust-ups in his time at this point, so he figured he sees some fat blob in the audience that's looking, you know, inebriated. Could be an easy W for him, right? So he calls the guy out. Hey, man, you want a piece of me? Talk some shit. Yada, yada, yada. Come follow me. He says, to his surprise, before he can even finish, you know, the guy hopped out of his seat to go meet him. That guy ended up being 2-ton Tony Galento. And Gleason, before he even knew what happened to him, before he even knew, well, you know, before he can even blink, he said he was knocked unconscious. Pop, 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 and just laid there, you know, folded like an accordion in a garbage can somewhere, just straight up cooked. All right. Got lamped in 20 seconds by a drunk Tony Galento, who probably went waddling off to go buy some more beer and chicken or something later on. And as he did that, when Jackie Gleason came to, missing teeth and bloodied up and just, you know, completely bewildered, they explained to him who Tony Galento was.
Might have looked like shit against Joe Louis, but that's not a guy that you want to get into a fucking bar fight with.
No, absolutely not, man. Dude, he had absolutely ham hocks for hands and just nah. Mm-mm. You know, I've seen enough videos on YouTube out there on just like at the beach and other stuff with the same type of body types of Galento, just straight up dominating dudes, like body beautiful Mike Weaver looking guys. You don't mess with them, man. For whatever reason, they just know how to scrap.
Bruh, yeah, it's just like, you know, the average street fight is like 13 seconds. So if it's like somebody can take a few punches, they're probably going to win. And Galento could take a few punches. Don't fight that guy in a bar. So yeah, Jackie Gleason, I apologize, buddy, but you deserved it. You deserved it.
And Galento, to his credit, you know, ended up being a fixture in boxing. He moonlighted as a popular wrestler, which was fitting for him. But if you see a lot of the Ring magazines and other publications from like the 60s and 70s, you'll see that Tony Galento was always in the back of them. Whenever they had like the photograph features, you'd always see him in the back, you know, at some kind of VBA or ring, whatever, somewhere in the LA area, with a bunch of other old timers sitting there, you know.
Yeah, and with a cigar in his hand, and usually with a drink or something like that.
And he had lost a lot of weight by that point, and he had like the whole comb over thing going on. Totally different look.
So I'm gonna move on, but by moving on, I'm actually going back, like not quite a century, but almost a century.
Way back. All right.
Yeah, almost a century actually. So I will admit I did have to do, well, I wanted to do some searching around, because I mean I could think of a whole shitload of instances from the last like 20 years, 25 years where trash talk went wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of the stuff that we have seen from that time, you know, that time period, and not just the fights, but like, you know, the build up to the fights, the pre-fights, you know, all that type of stuff. We've simply just lived through more of that, seen more of that, and all that type of stuff. So I did have to look around, and I did get some help. So I'm not going to lie there. However, I was kind of reminded when I did get that help about this article that I, you know, came across years ago, because I have just like you, a massive stack of The Ring. And so in any case, this article is from the October 1972 issue of The Ring, and it's the issue with Roberto Duran and hitting Ken Buchanan low on the cover. So I mean, you know, it's significant because of that. But in any case, one of the little kind of sub captions or whatever on the cover is who was the dirtiest fighter of them all. And so this actually figures into our discussion. So there's a guy named William Thompson, whose nickname was Bendigo, and he
Bold
was
Bendigo, right?
named, what's that?
Bold Bendigo.
Yep, exactly. And he was named as, at least in this issue, as possibly the dirtiest fighter of all time. I mean, I honestly, I thought the article was more interesting than anything because it doesn't really do a great job of bolstering the idea that he was literally the dirtiest fighter of all time, because there's actually a few instances where he was done dirty in the fucking in the article. But in any case, the trash talk stuff is actually more interesting. So William Thompson was a dude from England, obviously from Nottingham, and he actually had two twins, and his birth name was Abednego, which was a name from the Bible. He and his two twin brothers, his triplet brothers, were all named biblical names, and for whatever reason, Abednego was somehow bastardized or changed to Bendigo, and that's what he went by as far as his nickname. But he was about middleweight sized, and he wound up taking on a dude named Big Ben Kant. And of course, I closed it, so let me go right back to it here. But he took on a dude named Big Ben Kant, who was much bigger than he was. Ben Kant was like a legitimate heavyweight back in the day, a good 220, 230 pounds, 6'1". Bendigo was like 5'7", 160 pounds, 5'8", something like that. But he had a very peculiar style. And one of the reasons why he was named as, I guess, a dirty fighter, which seemed kind of funny to me in this article, was because of his style. Did a lot of ducking and weaving and I guess circling around his opponents. We were talking about Bam Rodriguez and shit earlier, but I mean, that doesn't really
That was definitely something not seen in the early 1800s.
Right. Now, to me, that doesn't sound dirty whatsoever. But back then, we're also talking about a time when it was considered gentlemanly or proper to engage one another rather than box around or something like that. But you wanted to see these dudes scrap. You didn't want to see all that type of shit. So basically, as far as the trash talk goes, we're obviously going back to the 1830s here. And when we're talking about trash talk, that's obviously far removed from like modern day trash talk. And I guess you could wonder, I don't know, where did this trash talk start?
Oh boy, talking about some old lingo right now.
Well, back in the day, in order for these fights to happen, you kind of wonder, like it wasn't like it is now. There's obviously not TV, there's not radio, there's not these kinds of things for fights, for a word to get around, but there was print. Mm-hmm. And so fighters would call each other out in print sometimes. But in these circles in like the 1830s, at this point, the circles in boxing were small enough at this point that you probably would run into each other sooner or later, whether it was in training or something like that, rather than having to call each other out in print. Although, again, that did happen. Nonetheless, just like in olden times when somebody would challenge somebody else to like a duel, there is kind of like a thread of truth to that old stereotype about a dude coming up and fucking bap, with a glove, slapping him with a glove or something like that. There is some thread of truth to that, supposedly, that at least when it came to challenging a duel, it would be like, if there wasn't a slap, there would be an insult. Like a dude would come up and insult another guy, and that would lead to be like, you can't fucking insult me like that in public.
Well, that was a whole Simpsons episode, remember?
Yeah, yes, that's true.
Yeah, do you remember that one where he came with the glove slap and then he had to move to another town because he slapped the wrong dude and he wanted to have a duel with him?
Yep. Well, and I mean, there's some truth to it. And
that's
so
true.
that's
then he slapped, and then Jimmy Carter was about to challenge him to a duel too, and he ran away.
I mean, think about it. That shit would be pretty fucking insulting, I guess. If somebody like took off their shirt and just whipped you with it in front of everybody, you'd be like, what the fuck? Now I gotta fight you. What?
Oh my God, yeah, man.
I mean, of course. And then of course, back in like the 1800s, like nobody's got any fucking thing to do. So if there's like a fight,
yeah, I mean, bro, you're surprised. You're like, to be honest, I'm surprised they fighting about that.
Bro, you got fucking Wilhelmina. You got Wilhelmina about to stop churning butter right?
Yeah.
Fucking Brutus is going to stop milking the fucking cow. There, everybody's going to come running into the town square and shit, pillories.
It's not gonna be a
Yeah,
fight. So yeah, they're taking out pistols and they going at it for that one.
for anything. Somebody's shouting at each other. There's probably like, what? Let's go. You know, there's nothing going on in the 1800s. So they're probably trying to fucking figure this out. But, anyways, when it came to talking trash and calling each other out, there was some manner of that at this time. In any case, apparently William Thompson Bendigo did a little bit of that too. And so when they first fought, Ben Kant in 1835, there was this kind of back and forth at the time about who actually possessed the heavyweight championship or the championship of England, but it definitely was not on the line at this point. And in 1835, when they fought, apparently Thompson pissed off Ben Kant enough that after 22 rounds, Ben Kant, between rounds, supposedly he was pissed off enough by all the movement and ducking around and shit talk that he went and hit him as William Thompson was sitting in his own corner and was disqualified and lost on a foul. And so a couple of years later, they rematched for the championship of England. But I mean, again, there was a lot of kind of back and forth as to who was really champion. And occasionally people would claim to be champion and it would be accepted in some circles, but not accepted in others. So this was advertised, I guess you could say, as for the heavyweight championship. And this time it actually, this is when the tables turned on William Thompson, because another thing that William Thompson was known for doing, apart from the ducking around and spinning and shit like that, was if he had started getting hit, if he had started taking punches, he would just fall to the ground without being hit, which at this time, again, illegal. Yeah, it was not only illegal, but it was considered like one of the worst things that you can do, like in boxing, because there was some amount of wrestling and grappling allowed. There was some amount of tripping and shit like that allowed, depending on who was refereeing and where it was taking place. But another element to this that was actually really interesting was that William Thompson was part of a gang, and his gang used to come around with him to fights, and they would hang around and threaten people, including officials and other opponents and shit like that. And so in any case, that's also what was happening during the fight. And what would happen is William Thompson would fall to the ground, and if somebody would threaten to disqualify him, his gang would go over and start threatening and start acting all menacing and shit. So they'd be like, whoa, all right, we're just going to start this over. And anytime somebody went to the ground, whether involuntary or getting hit, or not getting hit, voluntary, the round was over. And so the action had to stop and there was a break. So that would be an incredible way of getting, getting a break, getting your second wind or whatever. And that's apparently what William Thompson used to do all the time. And in this rematch against Ben Kant a couple years later, he supposedly just kept going to the fucking floor after like round 60. So they were 75 rounds in. And apparently, even despite the fact that William Thompson's gang was running around the ring and threatening people, they still disqualified him. And he lost against Ben Kant. So, sorry, one last one. Fast forward 7 years later, and they fought for a third time. And actually, Ben Kant was disqualified again in this one because they claimed that he went down without striking him. But in this fight, he was lifting him all over the ring, trying to crush him against the ropes, smushing him, strangling him, all sorts of shit. And Ben Kant got away with all sorts of crazy fouls. But anyway, the trash talk does figure into this, because in an era when, there really wasn't trash talk like that going on, because it just wasn't really considered. And on top of that, boxing was kind of dangling precariously in England, where it had really rose to prominence around the turn of the 19th century and then was starting to fall out of favor. And the way that these fights wound up, because they were extremely popular in English society at this time, the way that they wound up so controversial, that many people believe, many historians believe, that how shitty they were led directly to the Marquess of Queensberry rules being developed in, I think it was 1860. So in the 1850s and 1860, there was a big like reformation, or I guess just kind of a big redo of a lot of shit going on in boxing in England, and many people believe that those fights were why.
Well, absolutely, man. And one thing I'll mention about Ben Kant is that, and the one thing I do remember, because in the same book that we bring up in almost every episode at one point or another, the book that I read cover to cover all the time as a kid, The Pictorial History of Boxing by Nat Fleischer and Sam Andre, I think. Their first section is all bare knuckle, especially about like the bare knuckle heavyweight division. And they have a big feature on the fight between Bendigo Thompson and Ben Khan. And they talk about all those fights. They have like descriptions, the drawings, all the other stuff in it. I love that whole thing. And I used to read all those, like the whole bare knuckle era cover to cover, because it's fascinating to hear what was going on for scrapping in the late 1700s, very early 1800s, you know, the first American champion, all this other stuff. It's cool. But one thing I do remember that was really striking is that after Ben Khan died, they have a photo of him in his death mask. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. There were actually, I don't know.
It's like for some reason that just like stuck out to me, and I'm just like, I just remember that they were like, there he is in his death mask, and it kind of just looks like, I don't know, it was like the face that I guess he was supposed to have or some shit. But
yeah, if you had enough money, somebody would make a death mask for you, I guess, back in the day. But
interesting.
But I mean, yeah, it's a lot of them wound up looking really freaking creepy. But at the same time, I guess the idea was that it was better than looking at like a corpse face or some shit.
But there was it's an interesting era from with Bendigo Thompson, who the guy that had the longest fight on record, Def Burke.
Yeah, Andy Bowen.
Simon Byron was another one around that time. Tom King. We mentioned Daniel Mendoza, who came a little before them. You know, it's really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, more than just a little piece of trivia, but trivia nonetheless. Daniel Mendoza was the first Jew to ever be granted audience with the King of England, which is with like direct audience, which first of all is obviously really sad, but nonetheless significant. So, you know, pretty crazy shit.
Absolutely. With that being said, we're actually going to go fast forward a bunch of years. Actually, probably
yeah, I
over
took
100.
It way back, so we could.
Yeah, you took it way back, and that was
feel
really
free to bring
cool
it back.
but no, we're going to wind back up to the my favorite decade, the 1980s, and we're actually going to intertwine our last subject that we talked about, the Kronk Gym, with this one. So the year is 1985. I'm going to do 3 subjects on this one really quick. The year is 1985. And by 1985, the Kronk Gym is thriving, but they had a rough year in 1985, I would say. Wouldn't you say so? Because they suffered 2 big L's, significant L's.
I was going to say McCrory.
And Hearns.
What's that?
Hearns and McCrory.
Yeah, I was going to say McCrory, and then I guess Hearns would be a pretty bad. I mean, it was an incredible fight, but yeah, it was a pretty bad loss.
Yeah, but in considering with both of those happening, the first one I'll bring up, it doesn't reference both of them, since this fight happened on the undercard of Hearns Durant. Well, actually, no, I take that back. The first one I'm going to bring up actually is before 1985, so I kind of fucked it up.
It's okay. It's still 80s though. We're still in
the
80s.
80s. Yeah. But it still references a Detroit fighter. Years before our buddy Anthony Hembrick did his own version of Beat Street on USA Television and against Booker Ward. There was a fighter by the name of Alvin Too Sweet Hayes. You remember Alvin Too Sweet Hayes?
Yeah, we briefly brought him up in the first Kronk.
Yeah. He was a popular Detroit fighter from the early 80s who had a lot of prominence, and he was very, very flamboyant for the time, you know, even for the 80s at that point, and a big trash talker at that too. I mean, he had every right to be. He was very popular. He had the lanky build up of Tommy Hearns, except he was a lightweight, and he was knocking the hell out of everybody. His biggest win at that point was a washout over Edwin Virouette. So anyways, now this is big time on the undercard of Hearns Duran. He's fighting against Kronk standout Jimmy Paul. A lot of trash talk before the fight about what he's going to do to Paul, yada, yada, yada. And then before the fight, this is what I'm talking about, man. Like I said before, Hembrick. This dude puts on the most ridiculous show you have ever seen with the dancing. All right, he comes out there cutting a rug, jigging everything. But what makes it even better, he's wearing a full costume. Like he's like in a Zorro outfit, except it's pink. He has the mask over there. He has the cape on and this whole thing. And he has this routine that he goes on with his trainer, mind you. And they're using and remember you was talking about using like the towel to slap somebody. Trainer's slapping him and he's doing like spins off of it when he hits him like in rhythm, boom, like that. It looks like a whole, Soul Train routine. You would think they were going down to the line, with the Michael Jackson. Swear to God, it was awesome. But the announcers didn't think it was awesome. All the curmudgeon like old timers over there were kind of making fun of it. Or do you think he can get away with this?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, do you think what is this? I don't know. You think he can get away with this in Fall River? No, I don't think so. Like, yeah, whatever. So, long story short, after that whole routine, after that whole spiel, Too Sweet ends up getting the hell knocked out of him badly against Jimmy Paul. Like, it was bad, man. In front of, that was the biggest audience Too Sweet ever was in front of. He made a big deal before the fight, was talking a lot of trash. This was a big, inner city fight between two Detroit guys to begin with. Kronk representing the Paul and Jimmy Paul representing the Kronk gym, and Too Sweet Hayes being a Detroit staple himself with Kronk ties to a degree, and Paul obliterated him. Paul ended up becoming IBF champion, and Alvin Hayes unfortunately just succumbed to other stuff. Moving on though, as we were going to talk about now, 1985, the buildup between Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler. Now, everybody talks about the fight because it's such an incredible fight, obviously, about how, the greatest round in boxing history, greatest 9 minutes, yada, yada, yada. People almost forget the lead up to the fight, how much shit Tommy Hearns was talking.
Dude, I mean,
I know you got to build a fight and everything like that, but like, they went on a whole promotional tour across the country. Hagler is the type of guy that gets moody to begin with and doesn't really want to do this. And Hearns, because he wants to sell the fight and at the same time antagonize Hagler, has to be the mouthpiece.
Yeah, and Tommy had like a kind of high pitched voice. You know what I mean? Like he was like he had a kind of funny voice. And this was right around when he had the Jerry curl too. So I mean,
this was the mid '80s, man. The Jerry curl was where it was at that point.
Yeah, dude. Like a lot of people had that shit. But like I'm not gonna lie, I'm somewhat torn when it comes to Tommy. Sometimes he's still my favorite fighter, but every so often somebody's gonna be like, "Oh, dude, did you know he was like a volunteer cop?" And I'm like, "Don't talk to me about this. We don't mention this in my house, okay? We don't mention this stage of Tommy Hearns' life." Now, and right around the Hagler fight too, he got pretty vocal. Like it seemed like he was feeling his oats a little bit, and I think probably as a result of knocking Roberto Duran damn near clean out. I mean, and rightly so, because I mean it makes sense. It almost doesn't make logical sense to a lot of people I know, because they're like, all right, well, Roberto Duran struggles with Marvin Hagler, but then Tommy Hearns knocks him out, but then Marvin Hagler beats the crap out of Tommy Hearns, and then you bring Ray Leonard.
That's why they were the legit kings.
But yeah, that's the whole point, was that like, the styles make fights and blah, blah, blah. And that's why it's fun. But nonetheless, after knocking out Roberto Duran, I'm sure Tommy Hearns was just like, dude, I fucked this guy up, bro. Like, you got nothing for me. So I'm sure he probably did feel that way. But nonetheless, he got a little loose. He got a little loose with his mouth.
I mean, if you watch the HBO documentary, when they did the Legendary Nights, they show clips of the press conference, and you hear Hearns in his high-pitched voice, like you said. He's standing over Hagler. Hagler is just absolutely brooding. He wants to be in Cape Cod or wherever he would train in the trenches and just be away from everybody. And Hearns instead, and he's just sitting there because he's not much of a talker. And Hearns is saying to him, "That's right, in 3 rounds, I'm gonna, 4 rounds, I'm gonna knock you out, and pop, you're gonna see." And he's doing the hand movement and all that. And Hagler is just like, you see like the vein throbbing in his forehead. It's just, he doesn't want to do this shit. I don't blame him. I think I would lose my mind going on how many tour things that they did?
Dude, they did.
30, like they went all over the country, man. That was one of the craziest cross country. Actually, like this, what they're doing today with Canelo and Triple G, it's not on the level of this in terms of where they're going. But like, It reminded me of that because they have
but
to do
it's at least closer. Yeah.
because they got to do they did a face off the other day. They did another one. They have to do another one today at Yankee Stadium.
And
Like
they're doing the things just like today. They're
yeah.
doing the shit where they're filming commercials where they're like shirtless and all fucking sprayed with water and they're like face to face and shit. Dude, I'm sure that shit got heated, you know. And then on top of that, you know, you got to fight this dude in like 2 months, and you're just like, what the fuck? That was probably uncomfortable. But then also they did the tax commercial because
I was gonna say, man, no one can touch the tax commercial.
the fight is on tax day, April 15th, you know, the universal, you know, every year tax day or whatever. And so
that's one of the best commercials ever.
I gotta give Top Rank that shit. I gotta give Bob Arum that shit because he figured into the promotion that
was probably Irvin Rudd. That was probably Irvin Rudd.
That's true. It might have been. That's probably true. Well, in any case, employing Irving Rudman was Bob Arum's genius. But yeah, dude, they're sitting there going like, don't forget to do your taxes. And then they're each in, yeah, dude, that's a fucking great commercial.
Yeah, so dude, you file your taxes, then come watch the fight. Oh, well, I knock him out. No, you're gonna knock me out. Blah blah blah. But I mean, we all know. Also on the rebroadcast of Hearns Duran. Remember when they had them both in studio, and Tommy's talking a little bit of shit then too, and Marvin's just like, okay, all right, you know, like. Well, not only was Hearns trying to promote the fight, you know, he was feeling it. He was on some major momentum. Yeah, the Duran knockout was incredible. Knocking Duran out, no one had done that to Duran before. Even if Duran was perceived to be a little bit past it or whatever, nobody had ever like treated him like just an absolute ragdoll. Dude was turned into 154 pounds of just melted pudding. You know what I mean? Just and
yeah, never forget they stand him up and he's like, it's almost like he's asking like, where am I? What
I mean,
happened?
dude, you know, imagine getting hit with that right hand. You know, it's like having a Buddy Rich drum solo just straight up on your brain at that point. There's nothing you can do. He scrambled, completely gone. So yeah, he was definitely feeling himself. Considering Hagler's struggle with Duran, Hagler never looked that ferocious the way Hearns did. Hearns is moving up. He's taller than him, got the longer reach, and he thinks he's invincible, can knock anybody out. You know. He was saying it. I'm sure he believed what he was saying, but all you did was just piss off the bull, man. And Hagler just, oh my God, the punches that he received. If you just watch that first round and you just see the way Hearns, like, of course he broke his hand. Hearns was fastball and everything, just pow, pow.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Dude, no human has any right taking those type of punches. You know what I mean? But
yeah, dude, and I mean I guess just imagine if his hand had not broken, that would have been, who knows?
Yeah, I think it would have won a few more rounds. He still would have gotten overwhelmed. But I mean, yeah.
But I do know that he had issues with his hands, you know, in his career. A lot of punchers do, like a lot of guys who throw like that too. A lot of fighters who throw like that too. But yeah, dude, Tommy probably got just a little bit, you know, pissed Marvin off.
And, you know, you don't want to piss a person like Marvin Hagler off. That just was the wrong thing. Hagler was already perpetually pissed off, all right? You know, it was notorious for him to develop a hatred for his opponent because he would like lock himself in the middle, usually in the wintertime, in Cape Cod, in some like nowhere out in the beach area, which I can tell you might be the single worst type of conditions you can imagine. New England out in the beach area in the wintertime is just a big no-no. And, you know, goes out there, stays away from everybody, doesn't even talk to his trainers. Sometimes talks to the Seagulls that he starts naming because he just has nothing around him. And then, yeah, all he does is think about his opponent. Just walks around pissed off, thinking about it. The last thing you need to do is give him added ammunition when all he's doing is thinking about destroying you to begin with. So, you know.
Big mistake. I mean, hey, dude, he did what he could. That right hand was massive. He did what he could.
It was, and you know what? It like, you know, put their names in the history book as one of the most ferocious fights in history that people look back upon. It's going to go on forever. You know, years after we're gone, people are still going to be watching it for the first time, are going to be astounded by its violence, by the, you know, the way it went, everything. And that's the beauty of this era that we have television and, you know, video and all that. Thank God we had that recorded.
Yeah,
Because all the eras that would talk about Zale Graziano, for example, or like major fights like that, we can't look back on those and like try to, you know, watch them and enjoy it. They were never recorded, you know, or if they were, they're on some shim sham that you can kind of see some grainy footage in the background of it. So it's like, you know, at least we grew up in this era where we can enjoy these. We have them at our fingertips whenever we want. But moving on again, now we're moving out to December. Kronk team is trying to rebuild. They got another big fight now. This is a unification fight for the welterweight championship. Milton McCrory against Donald Curry. And it's kind of the same thing. Curry is a mild-mannered guy. Doesn't like to talk a lot. You know what I mean? Kind of just, you know, handles his business in the ring and goes about it like that. Looked upon at this point as a pound-for-pound great that's potentially could be the guy to unseat Hagler one day. McCrory, on the other hand, was maybe not looked upon at the same point as Curry, but still another like budgeting star that, you know, this was a big fight. All right. He was a part of the Kronk team. And this was his chance to, like, you know, put himself in the limelight, not really be in Tommy Hearns' shadow. So before the fight, in the lead up to it, they were talking a lot of shit, but not Curry, McCrory. McCrory was talking a lot of junk about specifically Curry's heart. Can Donald Curry have, you know, does he have a lot of heart? He can't take it, all this other stuff, yada, yada, yada. But what made it even worse, it wasn't just McCrory that was pushing this. McCrory had his little tag team, you know, all of his buddies from the Kronk gym out there talking shit too in the audience. Every press conference, all of them were over there, all, you know, usually appearing on the undercards. A lot of the lower name fighters that we mentioned, some of them on the last show, they'd be out there in the audience. Yeah, tell him, champ, blah, blah, you know, Curry sucks. Even Hurley Sneed, a bantamweight who would eventually fight Luisito Espinosa and get curb stomped, went up to Curry's trainer, Paul Reyes, and told him, speak English. Because Reyes was Mexican-American, you know, had an accent, stuff like that. Like, they were talking some serious shit, all right? I see you shaking your head from that. Yeah, like, it's clearly this was getting under Curry's skin. You know what I mean? And like they always said, like my mom used to say, everybody always said, be careful about the quiet ones, right? Like, you don't want to, you know, press the bull. Especially a guy like Curry. Like, Curry was already, like, the way he fought, he was a beautiful fighter. The way he held his hands, everything, he was almost perfect. But you never saw him, like, lose control or feel like he was out of control. He always just was, like, in the pocket and just took care of his business. This one, slowly, he was fuming. And so I'll give you a quote here because I actually had to bring out an old magazine for myself. Mike Tyson's first issue, where they cover Curry and McCrory in this. But
yeah, we're actually, you know, we're researching here.
For sure. Always
legit research.
In the weeks leading up to the fight, the basic hype seemed to be a question of who had heart under fire and who didn't. McCrory appeared to be the instigator in lighting Curry's ire, but his future conqueror said it was Emmanuel Stewart, master of Kronk's boxing army, putting words in Milton's mouth for encouragement because he really didn't want to fight me. In the final press conference, 48 hours before the first bell, the usually inflammable Curry made a strong point when he was finally fed up with Milton's snide insinuations.
Insinuations.
Yeah, insinuations. Jesus Christ, how can I not say that word right now? Insinuations. Notably, Milton declaring, I've been second fiddle to everyone. Second to Tommy, second to Donald. Hearns blew his chances. This is my chance, and all the intensity will come out when I knock Curry out. Looking directly at McCrory, sitting on the right side of the dais, Curry glared. And this is what I point where I said, don't poke the bear. Now he's pissed off. Let me emphasize that I will defeat your string bean heart. I'm going to knock you out in the 7th or 8th round, so be ready, buddy. I'm going to take your string bean heart with a knockout, and a string bean heart is a little bitty heart. Turning to the heckling Kronk boxers in the audience, Curry added, and the rest of you Kronk fighters better be ready too, because I ain't through with you yet. I'll show you that Curry has heart.
Well, it didn't take no 7 or 8 rounds.
It certainly didn't, man, because after that,
man, that's one of the most he had no business going on after that first knockdown fights ever, dude.
Dude, the thing with that is that, like, exactly, man, like Curry, he
gets up and he's like,
he kept his composure. Yeah, he kept his composure and he was like boxing the first round. First round, he clearly had control, but it was kind of like he didn't expect what was coming. That second round, bro, that left hook. It was that left hook, man, that sweeping, boom! Like, just, it was so perfect. You know, if you
Yeah,
want to look
it's like
at dictionary,
his
how to
arms
prove
and animated, like, swinging and shit, like in midair. Like,
they should have. He had no business. They had no business letting that fight continue after he got hit with that first hook. He was cooked, completely cooked. And then when he got up and Miller's Lane, let it continue, and then that follow up right hand,
folded him backward like a chair.
Just folded him like a piece of paper. Just
straight up lawn chair status. Boom.
Done.
Awful.
McCrory was never the same. Just.
Well, dude, Prime, whenever that was, Prime Lone Star Cobra was a force to be reckoned with, dude. An incredible amateur. We talked about him on a couple different shows, but incredible amateur.
Favored to be the gold medalist for the 80 Olympics.
Just so skilled, so technically sound, a really good fighter. A couple of glaring flaws that wound up catching up with him, but for the time being, man, so good, so good. And I think just because, like, a lot of the fans who are like maybe just a little bit older than we are and remember him from that time period are probably listening to this or looking upon this fairly fondly too, because it was a good that kind of mid 80s was a kind of an uptick, and I think really
and it was exciting. Think about it, like, the welterweight division was kind of in need of a star. It always been like a high profile division, and it didn't really have a star in itself once Leonard and Hearns moved on, and Curry had solidified himself at that point. Everyone looked upon, hey man, this guy might be the future of boxing. Like, not only might he beat Hagler, he might beat them all after a while, because he looked invincible at that point. But little did anybody know this was the beginning of the end of him. You know what I mean? In terms of being at the peak of his powers, because soon after this he lost to Lloyd Hunnigan in a massive upset, probably one of the biggest of the 80s, if not the biggest. And his career really never recovered after that. He still had success, but he never. Every time it almost seemed like he might be back to that cusp. It, like when he fought Donald Curry, not when he fought Donald, when he fought Mike McCallum. Beautiful fight to watch for as long as it lasted, and he was actually outboxing McCallum.
Yeah, he was doing what he did. It was just unfortunately.
He was looking like a prime Curry in that fight, man. He was,
a body snatcher was nobody to be trifled with,
No, not at all, man. And McCallum was in his prime too, and they were like the moves that they were putting, the feints, everything, the combinations. It was gorgeous to watch. But Curry was getting the better of it, and I think you could tell that Sugar Ray Leonard was even enjoying it, because I don't think he liked McCallum too much. And you hear him like kind of like giving shade to McCallum throughout the fight, until all of a sudden, boom, same thing. Curry gets caught again and just flat out.
Well, yeah. and that's like height of his punching power, McCallum too, because he's wasn't quite at middleweight yet, and just an absolute fucking beast.
Totally,
but absolute beast.
I thought that was good.
And also, I was just gonna say, because since you brought up God, you just brought him up a second ago. Fucking the dude who upset Curry.
Lloyd Hunnigan.
Dude. Yeah, Hunnigan. I was just gonna say, God, dude, the fucking Ragamuffin Man, one of the all-time great nicknames. Also, since we're going through great nicknames from the 80s.
That's a wonderful nickname, man. And he was a trash talker himself. I remember I talked to Mark Breland one time about him, and Breland was like, "Oh man, he was running his mouth before the fight, talking a lot of shit, yada yada yada, all this stuff." And he was like, "You're about his height, so this is what I did." And Breland walks up on me, and he like I walked up on him like this, and he bumped me with his chest, and then he just looked down, staring down at me, and I looked up at him because he's so much taller. And I just went, like, I gulped. And I looked at him, and he was like, I looked down at him, I was like, I'm gonna knock you out, blah blah blah. And that's what he did, man. He absolutely pulverized Hunnigan. Hunnigan at that point was past it, but I mean, still.
Oh, brutal.
He was fun for a little bit.
Yeah, dude, that's a good one, because that's probably not one that I would have looked at anyway. However, I'd also just kind of left off 80s and 90s, because I figured that those were eras that you were definitely going to have control over for sure. Here, let's see. All right, so One that I thought would be funny, especially because it's just recent enough that, you know, a lot of people who are around now are going to remember. They're going to think it's funny, you know, it's blah blah blah. But one that I thought that was really good as far as trash talk going wrong, and definitely going badly wrong in front of 80,000 people.
Oh,
There's only one thing this could be. There's only a little pull and a push, little pull and a, yeah, dude. George Groves getting absolutely
oh,
flattened
geez. Yeah, that's right.
by Carl Froch in their rematch. Yeah, dude. So I mean, I remember Carl Froch coming up, and I remember not really, I'm not gonna lie, dude, I didn't really think that much of him when I had
Nobody did, I
first
don't think.
seen him. I was kind of just like, he's not that fast. You know, he hits pretty good, but he's not
He
very
was
fast.
awkward.
Yeah, he's kind of got a funky style, and we're in rhythm. His footwork is kind of slow. It's not that great. You know, where are we going with this guy? But obviously, you know, the Jean Pascal fight, he showed a lot of stuff over like the couple of years there,
Mhm.
and clearly showed that he is a very good fighter. And going into that first George Groves fight, Carl Froch had lost to Andre Ward, and he had lost to Mikkel Kessler. And so Mikkel Kessler, obviously at that time too, considered elite talent, incredible jab. I mean, basically, as far as straight up 1-2 fighters go, really good fighter. But, you know, getting outside of that, you know, adding any nuance to it, and he struggled.
Mhm.
But still, you know, beat Carl Froch in a very good fight. But then he lost to Andre Ward, Froch, that is. No shame in that. You know, he gave a good account of himself, but just was not on that level. Again, no shame.
Totally.
But George Groves, undefeated. He was like 19-0, 20-0, or something like that going into their first fight. And he put on a really good show. He clearly showed a lot of Carl Froch's limitations. You know, he hurt Carl Froch pretty good early on in the fight. And then on top of that, you know, he was doing very well in the fight. But then Carl Froch basically did what Carl Froch does, and he weathered the storm and stopped him a couple rounds later. Except for the stoppage was controversial. Um, George Groves looked hurt, but
Mhm.
looked more or less able to continue. But there was kind of like a degree of, all right, well, if you're protecting the fighter, I get it. But they had to rematch, you know, with a fight like that, and the one guy gets hurt, but then he controversially stops the other guy. You have to rematch that shit. So they
Totally.
did rematch it. It was a big production. It was about 6 months later. So they had a handful of months of buildup. And right around this time, HBO had been doing for a few years that show Face Off with Max Kellerman. And so Max Kellerman, he pulled up the motherfucking chair, put it backwards like he was a G, sitting over the chair. All right, now, guys, you know, and it was like awkward as
Mhm.
fuck, kind of nerdy, but fine. It worked. And there were a couple of pretty fun and funny moments from that show. But then Sky Sports had done their own version of Face Off, which is, I wrote it down. What was it called? The Gloves Are Off. I couldn't remember what it was. And so Sky Sports started doing, it was literally like the exact same thing, except for with Johnny Nelson. And obviously, instead of Max Kellerman, you know, the whole backwards chair bit and shit like that, whatever. And so they're sitting at a table or some shit like that, and they're going back and forth, sniping the most mundane, stupid shit talk on the face of the planet, except for, you know, George Groves is getting some snipes in there. It's just, they're just weak, to be honest. But still, George Groves has been throughout this entire promotional cycle talking shit. You know, I'm going to knock him out. He should never stop me, blah, blah, blah. It was bullshit stoppage, all this sorts of shit. But the climax, of course, was the whole right towards the end. Johnny Nelson's like, all right, you guys are going to shake hands. And George Groves just like gets up. And it's like, he's just like, fool's
Yeah.
just standing there with his hand out for like 30 seconds and shit. Carl Froch is like, I'm going to take my time, wipe the sweat off of my hand, dust myself off, get up, look a little composed so we can do some handshake. And I don't know if that just pissed George Groves off or what. George Groves fucking pulls him across the table. And Carl Froch is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What? And he stops himself. Well, you want to pull about? You want to pull about? Have a little pull and a push. And he pulls him back over, and it's like the most awkward, like chest bumping moment. Have you ever like watched a fight and you're watching two people and they're like pushing, push, chest bump, push, and you're just like, if it gets to that point, somebody has to swing, and if you're not, then you're just a couple of fucking goofballs, and that's literally kind of
there was a guy at the Hall of Fame like that the other day that like there was a drunk dude that stumbled into his table and he didn't want him there with his couple of his girlfriends or whatever, and he yells, instead of like, he looks at the guy like he's going to confront him, and he slightly shoved him, and then he screamed extremely loud so he can get people's attention. Get away from me! Get away from me! And then like you stand there, but he clearly yelled that so he can get like people's attention to get the guy out of there, instead of like,
hold me back. Hold me back. Somebody come here. Hold me back.
Well, I remember me and my buddies were just kind of looking at him like, dude, you might, like, really? If you want to do something, you should have just done it. No, instead you scream and make a scene so people
if it's escalated to physical, it's simply escalated to physical. Let's fucking stop the nonsense. But that's pretty much the whole handshake bit, dude, was that it went, but I will admit it was hilarious. It made the rounds on social media. We saw clips, GIFs, memes. It was great. It really was great. And nobody talks about it really anymore. So it was fantastic. And then Carl Froch again did his thing where he just weathers the storm. And then, of course, super memorably in 8 rounds, knocked George Groves like.
Oh, he sparked him, man. Absolutely. That was a beautiful knockout.
Real bad.
And like, Froch was so
what's
awesome,
hilarious?
but it was,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
one last thing, but what's fucking hilarious is that you are going to have to scour the internet for clean clips of that knockout, because Sky Sports will fucking attack your ass if you post that shit.
Wow.
Or at least they'll attack your ass if your name's Patrick Connor and you run a fucking boxing history account, because multiple times they've been like,
no. They see how many people you're generating and watching. Yeah, they're not going to play that.
But honestly, on YouTube though too, unless they've put a newer version up like somewhat recently, like in the last maybe year or two, for a long ass time they would not post that fucking fight, and like you just could not find clips of the knockout. Like, I mean, whatever, you don't have to go like crazy fucking lusting after watching that knockout. It was just weird, just because every so often I like to watch fights and I'd be like, yo, where's this fight?
That was a vicious knockout, and it's fun to watch.
Sorry, I had to go on that Sky Sports.
Well, I mean, absolutely, man. It's yeah, you've definitely been unfairly treated over the years, bro. Everything you touch is zapped. It's messed up.
Helping you fools out.
Word, you just get cooked every single time. They're like, you're just on everybody's list at one point. Zip, zip.
Yeah, dude.
Patrick Connor again. God damn it. Hold up.
Oh, bro. A little promotional company that rhymes with stop shank has been going after my Instagram account, which is really weird because that's not even like, but anyway.
I've got a photo of you in his office just to stare at it with a bullet.
They are on it, but whatever. That's cool.
One dude I was going to bring up briefly, I thought this one would have been funny. Back in the 40s, a fighter by the name of George Sugar Costner.
Okay. George Costner, all right.
George Costner, yep. And in the Battle of the Sugars, he fought Sugar Ray Robinson twice. And I love George Costner. If you very, very tough contender.
Nobody is ever going to bring George Costner up on any other podcast whatsoever.
Probably not. George Sugar Costner was a popular fighter from the 40s. Very, very tough contender at the time, between lightweight to welterweight, even middleweight at some point. Fought them all and had immense success against a lot of guys. Beat Kid Gavilan, beat a lot of great all-time great fighters and great fighters. And even if he lost, he usually wouldn't, it wasn't like he was blown away or anything. He always gave a really good account of himself. The only guy he was blown away by was Sugar Ray Robinson. And the go-to saying is, man, don't piss off a person that's not really talking shit to begin with, if they're just trying to go about their business. And Costner, unfortunately, wasn't about that.
Well, dude, I mean, you right around this era, if you're talking about like late 40s, early 50s, that was not really a version of Ray Robinson that you should have been messing around with. I mean, he had bad nights, he had bad outings, of course, but right around his like welterweight or like lighter middleweight, like Rain, that was a scary
Mm-hmm.
guy. That was not a guy you would want to be messing around with. And on top of that, he did have ego. That's one thing that I know that like Ray Robinson gets he gets a little bit too much credit, like from history types, I think, as far as like, oh, he could do it all and he could, fantastic guy. When now I think we know better. Like he was kind of an icky guy in his personal life, not a super great guy. And on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, when it came to being divas, when it came to being, pushing around your weight in terms of star power and shit like that, he did that all of the time. And so, I mean, whether or not you think that's good or acceptable, I guess is up to you. But it's a little bit more gray area than, some people remember.
Totally. And Costner at that point, man, had run a very good record up. He beat a lot of really good fighters, and a couple of them a lot quicker than Robinson had. For example, a fighter by the name of Sheik Rangel, a fighter that I'm pretty sure no one else will ever bring up on a podcast besides us. Costner had blown him out in only, I think, a round or two. I actually have a wire photo that I bought at the Hall of Fame from that fight. But, you know, after running up a bunch of wins and just having the name Sugar as well, the stage was set that in 19 was it 44-45 he was going to fight Robinson beforehand. This first fight, Costner wasn't talking as much shit. All right, he was making a little bit of rumblings in the paper about being confident and stuff like that, but he was a little bit more reserved. For most part, he said something to the effect of, Robinson's always been my hero since I first started fighting, but I understand I got to go through him if I got to be where I need to be at the top, and yada yada yada. I'm confident I can beat him, and I'm gonna beat him. All the stuff. Um, didn't really quite turn out that way because Robinson, considering he's probably the greatest fighter that ever lived, even I'm sure he was a little perturbed that a person of Robinson who's used to like bossing people around, used to just having everyone just kind of like worship at his fingertips and stuff like that, having a guy who really hasn't proven himself to be your caliber talking a ton of shit, it's probably not going to go over well with you. You know what I mean?
Taking your nickname.
And taking your nickname, yes. Like, who the hell is this guy? So, of course, Robinson came out there a little bit quicker than he usually would instead of measuring somebody, and he blasted Costner out really fast. You know what I mean? Which was an embarrassing loss. I mean, not embarrassing in the sense that you lost to Sugar Ray Robinson. It's just the fact that you got blasted in one round and you were like already looked upon as a future champion. And according to Robinson's ex-wife, she says that what did she say? Hold up, I have to bring this up. Okay, it's right over here. According to Robinson's wife, Edna Mae Robinson, who was featured prominently in the HBO documentary about Sugar Ray Robinson in the late 90s, she says, "We attended a large celebration after the fight that was held in the cabaret room of one of the large hotels. Costner and his handlers were invited guests also. Costner came over to our table and congratulated Sugar on his victory, and asked Sugar Sugar would allow him to dance with me. Sugar then asked, 'Honey, will you dance with this fellow so that we can both teach him some lessons in the same night?'" Damn.
Yeah, well, that's trash talk gone right.
Yeah, right. Seriously. So, after a number of fights, and Costner ends up running up about an 8-fight winning streak, he ends up fighting Robinson again for another rematch. And for the rematch this time, he decided to ramp up the trash talk. And this point, anyone within earshot of him was going to hear what he was going to do to Robinson. I'm going to do this and that to Robinson. I'm going to beat his ass. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to knock him out. Like, he was very, very hyped about this one. At this point, Costner had beaten guys, I believe, like Kid Gavilan and Ike Williams. And, he was looked upon as a legit contender, if not like outright an uncrowned champion. So with all that being said, he's running his mouth. He's feeling really, really good. Even though Robinson blasts him in the first fight, Costner's feeling higher than ever. So within the earshot, he's telling everybody what he's going to do to Robinson, how he's going to knock him out, how he's the real Sugar and all this stuff, send him to retirement. Robinson finally confronted him before the fight. And Robinson said something to the effect of, listen, man, I heard all this shit you've been talking in the papers and I don't appreciate it. Enough is enough. You know, I'm going to have to teach you a lesson for this, blah, blah, blah. Costner tries to back up a little bit in his tracks. Oh, no, Ray. No. You don't understand. I'm trying to do that to build up the gate and just try to make more interest in the fight. You know, trying to play it off now because I think he knows he has caught himself in some shit, right? And Robinson again tells him, listen, I build up the gate by talking about my opponent and knowing and saying stuff like, hey, I feel he's going to give me trouble. He's a tough guy, all this stuff. I don't build up a fight by bringing him down like you are. And basically at this point, they storms off and Costner kind of knows that like, uh-oh, I pissed off the bull again. And in a rematch, the same thing, bro. Just one guy, like, it's not like Costner couldn't like handle all-time greats. He beat Ike Williams, all right? He beat Kid Gavlin. As great as those two guys were, they weren't Sugar Ray Robinson, and they weren't a pissed off Sugar Ray Robinson. And yeah.
Brutal shit, dude. Yeah, I mean, I guess just don't fuck with Sugar Ray, dude. At least, and that's funny that you say that too, because it's almost like there's like an unspoken etiquette, kind of like I was talking about before, where with boxing being this, you know, sport of gentlemen or sport of nice people, or you know, that probably goes back all the way to what we were talking about before in the 1800s, 1700s, actually, would I think be when the term was originated, the fancy, where it was basically if you were a boxing fan or a spectator, you were probably upper class because you were somewhere where you could go off to some fucking random place where people could fight and not get caught, you know? So, I mean, like, anyway, it's funny because there's this unspoken set of rules where Ray's like, hey, man, like, don't be talking shit. Like, I mean, let's talk about how good we are, how good the fight's going to be, or something like that.
Yeah.
When, you know, now we know better. Now a number of fighters have proven otherwise, that when you talk shit and draw a lot of attention, that sometimes that can get you paid.
And dude, like, and Robinson was the type of guy too that like, if he felt a certain way, he might carry you. Like he carried Henry Armstrong because Armstrong was one of his heroes, you know what I mean? And that was his last fight. He's, you know, did the same to other opponents he felt, you know, a certain way toward, like he didn't want to hurt them too badly. Don't piss him off though. If you give him a reason, you know what I mean? Especially when you're, like you said, you're carrying his nickname. That's already gonna like irk him to begin with. And now you're going out there running your mouth to everybody within earshot about what you're gonna do to him. After he already knocked you out in the first round in the first place, he's almost saying like this, is this guy even serious? Really? Like I got to deal with this even more now? So yeah, and, you know, in 2 minutes it was over. But I will say this for Costner before we move on. To his credit, after he was forced to retire at the young age of 26 because he was blind. He was blind in one eye. Commissions, doctors caught onto it, and his career was cooked. It ends up happening to a lot of very prominent fighters, most notably guys like Gypsy Joe Harris and a few others. So after his career ended, Costner struggled for a bit, you know what I mean? As a lot of guys do after their careers are suddenly done. But what are you going to do with yourself? You know, to his credit. And I remember reading about this in one of the old ring magazines from the 80s when they did a feature on him. And in other books, Costner went back to school. He got his GED. And then he ended up eventually even, you know, going from there. He went to college, enrolled into school, and then ended up getting a BA. You know what I mean? Like, and when he was full blown blind at that point too.
That's awesome.
So, yeah,
making something.
He was a major success story. Major success story.
Totally.
And when he talked about him in ring, he had like those big glasses that you see, like, you know, a lot of old timers would wear at that point when their eyesights were shit. But he had a big smile. He talked, you know, looked very well dressed, had a suit on, and he was just talking about his career and what he was doing and how happy he was with life and his love of jazz music. So
I know you could dig that shit.
I certainly can. But I thought that's, you know, definitely an obscure one, but it should be brought up because twice you try talking shit and twice it ends up in the first round splat for you.
It is an obscure one. Like I said, nobody's going to be talking about him on any podcast whatsoever. They probably will now, or they'll be going on to some YouTube channel talking about.
I mean, he's a fascinating character. You know, he's a very, very fascinating character that a lot of people, if you're not aware from it, you really should look him up, man. Really, really fascinating guy. Fighter, career, everything. Big fan.
So I figured, I mean, I got to kind of, I don't think I need to tiptoe around this, but I do need to at least talk about it with respect for a couple of reasons. But if you're talking about trash talk that's gone wrong, I mean, this is really obviously taking it to the extreme, but it does fall under the umbrella nonetheless.
Mhm.
So in the early 1960s, we've talked about the International Boxing Club in New York before. You know, Don Jordan was a fighter whose career was really under the microscope during this period when the International Boxing Club in New York was being targeted by the feds. He wound up capturing the welterweight title. The guy who won the welterweight title from him was Benny Kid Paret.
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah, so already you know where I'm going. But nonetheless, a lot of people forget that because what happened later dominates their memory of the welterweight division during this period. Benny Paret was the welterweight champion first. He captured the title from Don Jordan, and then he was champion for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ish. And then Emil Griffith defeated him to win the welterweight title about a year and a half into his reign. And then in their rematch, Benny Paret defeated Emil Griffith and regained the title. But you know, the at the weigh-in, as the story goes, and it has been substantiated, so it's not like it's some rumor. It is a legit story, and it was reported on at the time.
You can see photos that look like that looks like something's happening there.
Well, and oddly too, Griffith, at least at the time, looks like he's smiling, but it almost seems like I mean, and based on that, it could just be that he was smiling because he didn't know what the fuck to say or do. You know, like he didn't know how to react at that point. But during their weigh-in, Benny Paret pointed to Emil Griffith and called him maricon, which in Spanish is the F slur for somebody who's gay. And again, like I said, Emil Griffith in the photos looks like he's smiling. So maybe he just doesn't know how to react, or he's uncomfortable and he's like, you know, I should just fucking sock this guy here, but you know, I don't want to lose the payday or whatever the case may be.
I know he definitely was thinking about it.
But I mean, and then also to be in his position, you have to remember a couple of things. Emil Griffith, first of all, at the time, I don't know that he ever considered himself gay, but I do know that he at various points said that he was bisexual. Either way, hooking up with a man, having any sort of relationship with a man, being a man that was beyond friendship at the time in a number of states was not only illegal, but it was like if somebody perpetuated violence against you, nothing was going to happen to them type of shit. So it was like Benny Paret was actually, in a way, targeting him for violence and targeting him for backlash. And it was not something that was out in the open, I don't think. Like it was something that was kind of hush hush that people suspected, you know, quote unquote, knew about. But anyway, so to be a guy in Emil Griffith's position, to be called something like that, and then on top of that, be the champion and go on to lose your championship to that guy who just fucking did that, you know, like that, I'm sure it would be like a nadir, a really low point in your life that would be awful. And then they had a rubber match in 1962, in April of 1962. And this it was extremely significant for a number of reasons. And one of them being that this was a fight that was live on television. You know, it was for the welterweight championship. It had a famous referee who had been refereeing for a long time. They introduced fighters before the fight, etc. But again, before the fight, during the weigh-in or around there at some point, again, Benny Paret used the exact same slur against Emil Griffith. And this time Emil Griffith was like, I'm going to kill you. Yep. Like I'm not, I don't know who the fuck you've been talking to, but I'm gonna take your life. I'm gonna fuck you up. I'm beat you to death. And I don't remember the exact words he used, but I think he said something like, I'm going to beat this guy to death, or I'm going to beat the life out of him, or something like that. And so, needless to say, they go on to fight at Madison Square Garden, and it's a big spectacle. And 12 rounds in, after for a couple of rounds, it was a back and forth fight, actually, for about half of it or so. And then for maybe the last third of the fight, Emil Griffith starts putting the heat on Benny Paret. And then in the last round, just absolutely starts laying the bricks on him. And Emil Griffith was not a big puncher, is the thing. And we've talked about this before. Boxing fans in general, this is just something that's kind of known. A lot of the times when fighters get knocked clean out by one punch, that's like generally not where the danger is. Generally, where the danger is when a fighter absorbs punch after punch after punch after punch. And that's exactly what happened here. Emil Griffith was not a big puncher, and he just fucking put some work in on Benny Paret. But then, unfortunately, Benny Paret got propped up in the corner in the last sequence, and Emil Griffith just unleashes who knows how many, maybe 25, 30 punches that are totally unanswered, defenseless 100%. And Ruby Goldstein is almost like beside himself, trying to get in, wants to stop it, can't quite stop it. And then
should have just jumped in the middle of it somehow. He could have done something. Instead, he just kind of looked there aimlessly.
And it was awful. Paret slumps to the canvas and never fully regains consciousness after that, dies a couple days later. And I think, again, apart from the fact that a fighter lost their life, which is awful, the fact that a husband and a father lost his life, which is awful, obviously, apart from that, it was live. It was on TV. This was the early 60s, so TV was still somewhat new, in terms of being readily available to the public, et cetera, et cetera. So this was huge. This was a really traumatic thing. And so this discussion about what Paret said and what it led to, I think probably did not happen until many years later, at least not an honest discussion. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, for the last couple of decades, it's definitely been part
because what happened in the ring was the one that was the main concern. Everyone was just talking about, oh my God, Griffith killed him. Griffith killed him. They weren't blaming him, saying that he was a murderer or nothing, but they were just like talking about what exactly happened. That it overshadowed what led to like this all the events happening. But that documentary that came out in the
Ring of Fire
2000s, yes, that was really that breaks it down for you completely right there.
Very moving documentary.
Very, very moving. Especially when Griffith meets with Paret's kid at the end. And and they finally embrace and all that. And it's really, really touching stuff. Seeing Paret's wife too is really sad because you see the way she's trying her best, but even all those years later, and it was a lot of years later, she's still like totally like really a shipwreck from it. She couldn't even meet Griffith,
Yeah, she so Paret, Cuban immigrant, his wife, I believe she was also a Cuban immigrant, but if she was not a Cuban immigrant, she was Cuban American.
Yeah.
And in any case, sorry, I wasn't laughing at what I was saying, but I was laughing at you reacting to whatever the fuck's going on in your apartment.
I think some people just moved in upstairs and they've been dropping the most random shit, like so loud.
We're gonna have to put them up. But yeah, in any case, it was really sad at the time too. His wife, his widow, and her reaction to it at the time was pretty rough. He had a young son, the son that is in the documentary. So, I mean, again, I think a lot of this episode's lighthearted, fun, hilarious. This part, not as much, but it's like, I feel like you can't talk about this and not, not bring this fight.
Yeah, it's history. It's boxing history. Everybody that was involved in that fight, I'm not sure if anyone's even really still around from that era. Everyone that was involved in it was on that documentary, but the ensuing years, a lot of them have passed on. But it's just heavy stuff, man. It's just heavy stuff. Griffith, to his credit, was able to come back from that and continue his career and still have a very, very productive career, Hall of Fame career.
Probably even so underrated, a true all-time.
Yeah, totally, man. There's because the Killer Instinct, not to say that he was like a rampaging Mike Tyson guy, but like the style that he incorporated before, like most guys, after they, unfortunately kill somebody in the ring. Their styles usually get altered a little bit. You know what I mean? They're never quite really the same. I mean, there's exceptions. Sometimes guys can just continue on somehow, but like for the most part,
Yeah, or if it's not like a full-on style change or even a
yeah,
tweak,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just that their mentality is different, which
And that's what it is.
manifests in their style.
Griffith's mentality was different at that point.
Yeah.
But he was, you know how Griffith was always described as a guy that like he never did anything great, but he did everything so good. He was just, you know what I mean? He was just, you couldn't beat him really. It was just tough to beat him. You know what I mean? He always just had that reserve. He was in incredible shape all the time.
Punch first and last type
Punch
of guy.
first and let, yeah. You know what I mean? Just be in the pocket. Always struggled. And yeah, the Hall of Fame caliber guys, he fought all the way until the end of his career because he fought a long time. A lot of people don't realize, man, he fought all the way up until 1975. He was going in there with guys like Vito Interfermo and Alan Minter, who are completely
a hat maker. He was a hat maker.
And how he got discovered too. He was in the factory making hats or working in the factory, and he asked Howie Albert, who ran a boxing gym but also that factory, hey, can I take off my shirt? Because he was hot. Took it off. Dude was absolutely ripped to shreds.
He was just an absolute physical specimen, just shredded.
Yeah, and Howie Albert looked him up and down and was like, my God, I'm gonna make this dude into a world champion like now. And that's when he wanted to tell him about boxing. And Griffith that originally was like, I don't want to fight. What are you talking about? I don't want to be a boxer.
Well, a lot of writers used to describe Emil Griffith's voice as sing song.
Yes, that is totally, yeah.
Because that's, I don't know how I didn't notice that my microphone was slowly traveling down over the course of the show, but he had a very almost like Chris Eubank.
Yes.
Like a very similar kind of voice, just
except more happy. Yeah, I mean, like Griffith always seemed like he was in a good mood.
Effeminate is like too low of a fruit. I don't want to pick that fruit.
Nah, definitely not.
But that's kind of how it sounded, like Chris Eubank. But
no, it's been described in many books. Griffith had a very like sing-song type, like, the way he talked, the way he did, and he was, man, his whole attitude, he was very just happy. And if you saw him at the Hall of Fame before unfortunately his mind started to go. Dude, he loved everybody, man. All he wanted to do was be there, take photos with people, smile, hug little kids, and just enjoy the fans. Like he just enjoyed that shit.
The first piece of memorabilia I ever got was a signed 8x10 from
Emil Griffith. Yeah.
I have it around somewhere, but
I remember the first time I met him when I was a kid, and he was all happy to meet me and gave me a big hug and all that. And I talked to him about a few of his fights because I just all I wanted to do back then when take a photo. I saw you. I've read about you fighting blah 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 blah. And he was like, "Really? Where'd you read about that? You're just a kid." Well, I read about this in books. He's like, "Oh, look at you!" And he gives me a little noogie.
Sir, you must not know who Aris Pina is.
And that was, I miss him, man. Griffith was one of those guys that you would look forward to seeing every year at the Hall of Fame. But that was one. On a more lighter note, we'll move it on to 1997 here. Excuse me. With you remember on the undercard of Nassim Hamed, Kevin Kelly, Junior Jones on his birthday fought Kennedy McKinney, and before the fight was telling everybody and everyone and all the magazines and everything how badly he was going to whoop McKinney because he thought absolutely nothing of him. Did not like him, thought he was a bum. Man, and I remember in a go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Sorry, I'm getting excited and I'm like,
yeah. And like in this magazine, I remember there was a Ring magazine after Junior Jones beat Marco Antonio Barrera. So here's the thing with Junior Jones. All right, he first came on the scene in the early 90s. Everybody was really excited about him because lower weight fighters that are American are kind of hard to come by. And Jones had the lankiness of like Tommy Burns. Yeah, totally. And they had those promotional photos of him too, those cool ass ones where he was like in the boxing gloves and he made the face and he was like near all the potions and stuff like that. But he was knocking the hell out of everybody. So when he became bantamweight champion originally, people were looking for him not only as a future pound for pound great, but potentially even a Hall of Famer. He dominated a very good champion, Jorge Eliezer Julio, and sky was the limit for him. He loses the belt in a major upset to John Michael Johnson soon after that. And then soon after that fight, in a bit even bigger upset, gets knocked out by a dangerous journeyman by the name of Daryl Pinckney. At this point, everybody's completely written Jones off. Like it's, flash in the pan. And Jones, to his credit, rebuilds himself with a number of wins off television, builds him enough to the point where he's looked upon as a respectable opponent for a rampaging Marco Antonio Barrera. So when Barrera at this point has been featured on HBO prominently, he's, hotter than ever. He
was a big staple at the Forum at this point.
Totally, yeah. And that was even before he got it, before Boxing After Dark and HBO. Yep. Once he beat Kennedy McKinney, man, sky was the limit. Everybody wanted a piece of that dude. So it was supposed to be a formality. Junior Jones was going to go in there, and most people thought that Barrera would steamroll him. And to his credit, man, Jones, blasted him out of there. Incredible performance. You know what I mean? They're very memorable at the end when he hits Barrera with that final right hand. Barrera drops, and then when Jones is celebrating, Barrera's pissed off cornerman comes in and throws one of his wet sponge at him.
God, they were like the worst. They were some of the worst sports, bro.
They really were, dude. All the time. They were always babies about things. I love Barrera, but they And
anytime they ever had to do shit, it was like they were like sobbing and doing it. It was like
how dare someone actually beat you in a fight? I didn't know that was illegal. Like, what the hell, So, anyways, Jones now, all of a sudden, when everybody written Jones off, now he's back on the pound for pound list again, just off of that one win. Granted, it was a very, very impressive win, but everybody was like, man, Junior Jones is back. Blah, 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 blah. So he beats Barrera in a rematch.
Yeah, that was a crazy upset.
Crazy upset. It really was. That was an amazing upset. Then he beats Barrera in the rematch, and which proves that the first one wasn't a fluke. And he does it by decision, kind of, solidifying that he's looking good and whatever. So Jones now was even featured in a Ring Magazine article because everybody saw talking about it. He had a thing where he had his checklist. There's a photo of him with it has all the names. It was Hamed, Kevin Kelly, McKinney, this one, that one, right? Vianney Bungu, a couple other guys. And he's given little descriptions of each guy. I want Hamed, most money, blah, blah, blah. I think I'll beat the Prince this way. Kevin Kelly, he's my best friend. After we fight, I'll take him out to dinner. I love Kevin, all this other stuff. I don't really want to fight him. Kennedy McKinney. Kennedy McKinney's a bum. He's a scrub. He's going to do this. I'm going to whoop his ass if we ever fought. He's slow. He's ponderous. I'll knock him out in 3 rounds. He's easy. I'm going to do this and that to him. McKinney doesn't like him either. They're going to the press conference now. And like I said, man, this is big.
And Kennedy's seen better days too, because he's had a ton of problems in his career.
Totally.
Outside the ring problems.
And he had been around for a long time. McKinney was an 88 Olympian. But like you said, bro, he had a cocaine habit, had a lot of other issues going on. He was old. And he came off of that.
Welcome Nisita fight was what, like 92 or something?
Yes. And those were wars. Both of them.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. First one, he was losing. It was on his way to being stopped until he landed that Hail Mary right hand.
Fucking brutal out of nowhere. Just fucking bomb.
Incredible right hand. He got dropped moments before that. Welcome Nito came in to finish him off and just got flagged. Beat him in a rematch. But yeah, man, he had been through the ringer in a lot of tough fights. The Barrera fight would have taken years off of anyone's career. And he was more or less being brought in as cannon fodder. Like I said, this is Junior Jones' birthday on a major, massive card at Madison Square Garden in his hometown. We're in his backyard. This is all for a coronation. He's not supposed to lose this fight. This is all built for him to score a massive victory and propel him to a Hamed fight. And talk about taking an L on the biggest stage.
Madison Square Garden, New York. I'm gonna knock you spark out. Yeah, dude, fucking so wild to me. What I was gonna say when you started talking about this was just like, obviously you take Kenny McKinney, Junior Jones, Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera. Like these guys, it's not 4 Kings status, but we're talking when I was talking about earlier, the mixing and matching about the whole A beats B beats C equals A equals C, that shit does not work in boxing, which we already know because styles make fights. And this is one of those situations. Like the junior featherweights and featherweights from right around this era are like a perfect example of exactly that. We're fucking, Junior Jones proves that I guess he just had Marco Antonio Barrera's number. Like I don't know. There's no better explanation. Barrera just could not get anything going against Junior Jones, and Junior Jones had he just saw the counters. I don't know. He just saw the counters and executed. And so Barrera couldn't get by Jones. But then, Barrera is able to beat McKinney. And I know I'm not going in order, but then, McKinney's able to beat Jones. A lot of people felt Marco Antonio Barrera beat Eric Morales, but Eric Morales beat the piss out of Junior Jones. So it's like, dude, there's no logic here. There's no logic, but that's the whole thing,
It's true, man. And the fight in itself was really exciting. So put it this way, if like we didn't get that crazy ass fight between Hamed and Kevin Kelly in the main event where they traded multiple knockdowns, everyone would have been satisfied by this fight. That's why I was mentioning. That's why it's a fight that's featured in Lee Groves' Closet Classics, because it's a really, really good fight. And Junior Jones trying to prove his point that he's the man now of this division, that he thinks of Kennedy McKinney of being absolutely nothing to him, goes out there and just absolutely shoots his load on him in the first few rounds. Bro, I mean, I'm talking like puts in like 10 to 12 rounds worth of work in like the first 2 rounds, which is absurd to think about when you really think about it. But like, because it wasn't that he comes out there and just boom, 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 boom. Like he is whipping power shots out the wazoo, like going crazy trying to knock McKinney out because he thinks McKinney's nothing. And McKinney has always been a slow starter, notoriously, is just taking him. He's not really offering a ton back. He's, throwing back a little bit, trying to like keep his composure, but Jones is really trying to take him out. And, you're wondering to yourself, how is he going to be able to keep up this pace? Because he was really pushing a crazy pace at that point. So first 2 rounds, he's just boom, 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 boom. McKinney's taking it, offering a right hand back here and there, but Jones is really just kind of whooping on him. Finally, it looks like he's going to break through, and McKinney finally turns around after a series of body shots, I think in round 3, and goes down, right? Turns over, just crumples up, and finally goes down, man. I mean, Jones has been really lighting his ass up. But if you notice this too, Jones is throwing so hard and so many punches. Now you see him.
Yup. Mouth is wide open.
Mouth is wide open. His eyes are all like bugging out. Dude is just like, he is gasping, absolutely gasping for air. You know what I mean? Like that skit when Richard Pryor talked about when he boxed and he said, you lose all your air. And the opponent's like, oh, you want, when air just leave your body, air just say, fuck it. Kind of like the same shit, man. Like
Pryor had some all-time great boxing fucking stand-up.
Yeah, yeah. But and Kennedy McKinney said in a quote after that fight, he was like, he noticed because he was like, oh, I could take his punch. He's like, I'm taking it. And then he noticed that he saw his mouth open. He was like, man, his ass is out of shape. He was like, I knew it. He was like, now I'm going to get on him. Because that round 4, Junior Jones had nothing, absolutely nothing. He came out like a spent force, no legs, no nothing. Got cut, by the way, too, from McKinney right hands. Now he was dealing with a cut under his eye. And he's like breathing heavily. And McKinney, who always had a monster right hand, just started. And that was that.
Going to work.
And scored a massive upset.
Well, and
that was a massive upset.
Dude. It's like Kennedy McKinney was the kind of fighter where like he was dangerous because he could punch. Yeah. And he was dangerous because and he was experienced too. Like he wasn't some scrub, but he could be slow. He could be ponderous. He could be the kind of fighter that just kind of like covers up a little too much and goes to the ropes and shit like that. Goes inactive for a round. He could be beat. He was beatable. It was just that like, don't motivate him. Don't piss him off. Don't give him a reason to fight hard. Because like,
don't give him a reason to make sure he's not going to get knocked out, and don't fight like an idiot. Like that was one of the most boneheaded strategies you can find, to go out there and think you're going to like blitz him in a round or 2. But if McKinney's a slow starter, one thing you're not going to do is knock him out in a round. All right. The only person that was able to pull that off was Leocito Espinosa, who was a giant compared to those guys. And McKinney wasn't motivated for that fight. He even said so as much afterwards. He was going through a bunch of issues and he wasn't even thinking twice about it. This one, he was highly motivated for. Highly, because he knew what was going to come. He knew that if he won this fight, there was a chance he would definitely be in the Hamed sweepstakes. And he was supposed to be, because after that fight, it was scheduled to be, man. I've told you, I've read about this before. I don't remember what thing it was, but it was in an article where they had a schedule where it was supposed to be Kennedy McKinney was going to fight Hamed, and Arturo Gatti was going to fight Kevin Kelly on the undercard. And
what fucking body part was Arturo going to cut off to make that weight?
I have no idea. I think Gotti might have still been junior lightweight at that point, and Kelly might have moved up to fight him. I have no idea, but like
Yeah, that would have
that
been
would have been
bad.
absolutely bad for Kelly.
Yeah, that would have
Bad,
been
bad,
bad
bad.
for our boy, the Flushing Flash.
And I love Kevin Kelly, but I'm he was like, oh, Jesus Christ, how bad that would have been.
Yeah, that would have been
And they
bad.
kind of, and you know what? I almost think the logical thinking behind that is that like, hey, Gotti's an action guy, Kelly's an action guy. I bet you they'll make a really fun fight.
Yeah, I mean, I get where they could be coming from with that, but
yes, but it's just two different sizes, man.
no,
Two
dude,
different
yeah,
sizes.
no.
But regardless,
and
obviously, that whole card never came off.
and Gotti got in with De La Hoya not that long after that. So I mean, that was, Gotti he was, oof, yeah. If he would have made 130 pounds, it would have been like a Gamache situation, dude, with a fucking, he's like cutting off a limb to make that weight, but then coming in there a monster.
Totally. Because at that point, I think he was, yeah, well, Gotti was still fighting around junior lightweight at that point, around 97, 98, because he had the Manfredi fighting a couple others. So he was still lingering there. But yeah, regardless, because of the weight he gains after the weigh-in and stuff like that, he would have been completely blown up.
That would have been rough shit, dude.
But yeah, man, Junior Jones's bubble was completely popped after that because once he lost that fight again, he never ascended those ranks again.
Yeah,
he lost that
really
fight,
gained that form.
Tried the same strategy against Eric Morales that he did against Kennedy McKinney, thinking if it didn't work that time, maybe it'll work. Because if you watch that fight with Morales, he came out guns a-blazing again, right, in Tijuana. First couple of rounds, man, Morales is fighting right back with him, but Morales is totally like kind of taken it back by how much Junior Jones is throwing. And then by round 4, same thing, had nothing left in his tank, completely gassed out, and Morales just finished him.
Maybe he didn't train that well, but just got to the weight and just figured, fuck, I better try to knock him out or something,
I have no idea, man. But that was it. He, his career petered off after that. He had one fight against a fun fight actually against what was that? Paul Engel.
Yeah, Paul Engel.
And that was about it. But yeah.
All right, so I got a pretty good one. Probably shouldn't do too many more, but nonetheless, I got a pretty good.
We got one more for the night for me.
So back in 2011. So I'm going a little more recent.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2011, a little haymaker named David Haye.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
This is some pretty good trash talk gone wrong. I mean, because of the layers to it. So
the trash talks, the t-shirts.
Yeah, I'm not going to go through the whole Klitschko reign. We know what it is at this point, especially because they've been in the news recently. We've kind of rehashed their career. But Vladimir Klitschko on this second reign of his against so Vladimir Klitschko's in the midst of his second reign. Mm-hmm. David Haye, after just obliterating homeboy, what's his name, and at cruiserweight.
Enzo
Macronelli. He's the Italian dude.
Enzo
Macronelli. Sorry, I couldn't. Wow. Anyway, he obliterates Enzo, and he's at right around this point starting to talk about going up to heavyweight, because I remember actually, I don't know why he did this, but David Haye or somebody closely associated with him joined the Max Boxing message board and went on there and was interacting with fans. And at first we were like, that's not him. Yeah. But sure enough, like as an admin, I went and I checked his IP and I was like, okay, well, it's from the UK. So at least that's, that's one thing. But then one of the other admins got in contact with the account and verified it, that was him. Point is, the reason why I bring that up is because I remember at the time he was talking about, when I was, in high school, like I weighed this, so heavyweight's really not even that out of my wheelhouse. I'm cutting weight to make cruiserweight. And he was even posting photos of himself when he was like in high school and shit on the boards. We were like, whoa, okay, this guy's legit. What the fuck? This is weird. But he really was. And point is, he was saying, heavyweight's not a cut for me. I'm just not cutting weight. If I'm making heavyweight, I'm going to move up to heavyweight. I'm going to beat the Klitschkos. And I remember back then, everybody was like, shut up, dude. Klitschkos, get out of here. You're nuts. Over the next few years, or maybe 2 years or so, roughly. I remember he had gotten t-shirts made. The Klitschko's had some media day for some totally other shit, dude. Some totally separate shit. And the Klitschko's had some media day, and David Haye crashed the media day carrying fucking t-shirts that had him
I
holding the
remember that.
decapitated heads of the Klitschko's. Or maybe he had him holding them down. But point was, it was like, I mean, that's pretty fucking out there trash talk. I'm going
That's
to
some
kill
heavy
you.
shit, man. That's very gnarly, bro.
I'm going to kill you is definitely jumping up a few notches in the trash talk. Like that's definitely escalating shit. But he like was showing up places, not quite Shannon Briggs status, not quite where when you eat I eat champ, but he was showing up places and like fucking razzing them and shit like that. And then finally, I remember they put the fight together, and it was a big deal because Haye was, he had defeated Nikolai Valuev, albeit somewhat narrowly and in a really not fun fight because he had to run away from a guy who was like literally a foot taller than him and outweighed him by like 120 pounds or some shit. And in any case, he had scored these wins at heavyweight, which in my opinion were not that great, but nonetheless qualified him to actually get in then with Vladimir Klitschko in what I think was a unification at the time. And in any case, it was bad, dude. Vladimir Klitschko was just like, it was just too much. Anytime he landed a punch, Haye was like, fuck that, I'm out of here. And just did not
It was
really
an awful
engage.
fight, man. It was one of the most disappointing big fight performances you'd ever see, especially with all the crap that he was talking. Like you said, bro, it wasn't just like running your mouth a little bit and saying, yeah, I'm going to win the fight. I'm going to knock him out. He came with a t-shirt with their decapitated heads, like you said. He brought that shit to another level, and just other stuff he was doing. It was bad, like extremely, extremely bad. And with all that being said, and first he was supposed to fight. He was supposed to fight Vlad, then he was supposed to fight Vitaly, then he was gonna fight Vlad, like going back.
It was a whole back and forth with a bunch of shit. It was
so ridiculous, man. And the press conferences trying to pick fights, and I was expecting a full-on thing, and I thought he could win, man, because of him being quicker.
A lot of people did.
Stuff. Yeah, I was kind of hoping so too, because I'm like, he might bring some excitement in the division or do something. And
you're not alone. I picked Vladimir Klitschko, and I was like, I don't really like David Haye, but you're not alone in that, because a lot of people.
I wasn't even a Haye fan. I was just like,
just wanted to see him get fucking murked or whatever it was.
Yeah, but nah, he dropped an absolute egg, and then he blamed his toe of all things, man. His stupid toe. He was like, oh, I had a bad toe. And then he had the nerve to show it after the fight. Like, when people see that nangly, nasty ass
literally hopped up on the press conference table and took off his shoe and was like, look at my toe. Couldn't do it. Motherfuckers, worse, there were fools, like photographers that were like, click, 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 click. Okay, now pose it here.
What? That whole scene right there summed up the Klitschko era of the heavyweight division.
It was like, my God. How
that was awful. Such a bad time. That was a definite low for heavyweight boxing. That was.
Well, I think
the Klitschko's got banned from HBO for a little while after that, didn't they?
Yes. Well, at the very least, the HBO formal official line was, we're not in the heavyweight business anymore, was I think what they said.
Because after that, I remember the Klitschko's got banished to Epics. Remember them?
My God, dude. There was this like over the course of like 5 years, there were like several little things that just popped up and went nowhere. Like, you remember Wealth TV?
TV. God, yes.
Wow, like they had like a couple of fucking bangers on there and then just disappeared. Fucking.
I do remember Wealth TV. Yeah. Epics. I used to be at the studio because we would do the CompuBox at the studio with the announcers. So you saw, I don't know who would be announcing that day, but whoever was in there, we were working in there.
The last little wrinkle too on that was that afterward, Vladimir Klitschko went on to, I know he went on to Twitter. I don't know if it was other social media as well, but he went on to Twitter and dropped a video that was just him going like this with photos from the fight and making faces. So like, he has photos of Haye in the t-shirts and like Haye taunting him and shit like that. And he's just going, like rolling his eyes. And then he fucking goes like this. And there's a photo where he's pushing David Haye down and the way that he's pushing him down during the fight looks like
Yeah.
he's performing fellatio. And so Vladimir pushes this photo aside and just like is like, ooh,
Oh,
and then
sheesh.
goes to the last one, which is David Hayes' toe. And he's
Oh,
just
no.
like, dude, it was, I have to admit, for like saying absolutely nothing at all in like a 30
Just being
second
hilarious.
video,
Yeah,
it was good. It was real good.
that's
But
awesome.
the toe, bro. And on top of that, Dan Raphael would not stop hashtagging the goddamn toe for like 4 years, bro. He probably
Man, the
still
Fight
does.
Freak era was really tough, bro. Fight
He
Freak era was
probably still does.
Fight Freak era was a tough one. Remember all the chats?
Yes. I was never really into them, but I do remember them.
Oh, yeah, I read a couple of them. I don't think I was ever enjoying them shits. But uh, last one I've got to bring up, and of course, it's the one that you and I joke about all the time, and it's a very memorable one because it's one that many people always know about and can laugh about. Um, I guess, unless you're a fan of him. Fernando
I think
Vargas. Fernando Vargas, Oscar De La Hoya. Gotta finish on the high note, man.
I mean, between Oscar and Vargas, they both are on like both sides of the fucking equation here. Cause like Oscar dealt out some brutal retribution to both Fernando Vargas and Ricardo Mayorga for their
He
shit
did.
talk. And then, you know, fucking Fernando Vargas got his ass kicked for talking shit to Oscar and Ricardo Mayorga. So, I mean, like, dude,
You know, like Top Rank, because they're the only ones that could show their footage apparently. Put out a put out a tweet of the press conference. Part of the press conference where Vargas was talking shit about Oscar, and he was like using a very like high pitched woman voice type deal to try to describe how Oscar would talk. You know what I mean? Like
I
I
mean,
forgot
it's obvious. I mean, it's obvious. The insinuation is that he's like gay or
totally,
something.
that's what
You
he
know,
was
like
doing.
that's the
Yeah. No,
whole
he was
thing.
totally insinuating that and trying to heckle him and saying that. And he was like, oh, you know, like doing that. And, oh, I don't want to be touched. I don't want to be touched. Like just basically, you know, trying to. He was running his mouth. But the whole story, as you know, everybody kind of knows. Like, so to run it back really obvious. Vargas claimed when he was a kid that they were running in somewhere, right? A Big Bear or somewhere
Yeah,
around.
they said that they were
Was
both
it Big
training
Bear?
in Big Bear or something.
Okay. And Vargas tripped and fell into a ditch or something. And he said Oscar ran by and laughed at him instead of helping him. And that everybody else kind of did the same. And Vargas, for whatever reason, took that as a slight.
Was zeroed in on Oscar.
Yeah. And for the rest of his, you know, from that time period all the way up until he turned pro and afterwards, Vargas's main focus was fighting Oscar because Oscar decided not to help Vargas in the ditch. I'm sorry, I probably would have done the same thing. If we're out doing road work and I see you end up falling in a ditch, I'm probably gonna chuckle with my friends while I run by. What the hell's wrong with you, man?
Well, and it's just so like childish and absurd, dude. You know, and honestly, like not to get too like philosophical about this shit or you know psychology or whatever, but um I do kind of think there's almost like an element of like sadness to it
Mm-hmm.
because you almost have to know a little bit more about like Southern California and specifically Los Angeles, like East LA, and the dynamics and whatnot, and the late '80s and early '90s, and how popular Oscar De La Hoya was, but also
Yes.
how uh, just how polarizing the idea of an Oscar De La Hoya could be because he was Mexican American. He did not speaking or Spanish very well. You know, he
Mm-hmm.
was very much kind of like looped into the American dream
Yeah.
part of it. And you know, he's all about representing the United States. And this is not me. I'm not talking shit. Like you're raised how you're raised. He can't help how he was. That's how he was raised. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
But and the element of sadness to this is because I think that there were a lot of times where kids like Fernando Vargas probably did look up to an Oscar De La Hoya when he started getting popular in '92, you know, after the Olympics. He was, I would imagine, and perhaps not, I don't know. I'm not saying, and maybe Vargas would take this as a massive insult, me insinuating that, but there probably was a moment where he was like, I wish I could be like that guy. Or a lot of people in the Oxnard, around there were like, I wish I could do that type of shit. And so if that really were the case, if that really did happen to Fernando Vargas, and if he really did at the time look up to Oscar De La Hoya, and the dude kind of like, dicked him out like that, yeah, I'd probably be mad too. I'd probably be kind of bitter about it, to the point where I would literally go out of my way to talk shit about him in every single interview like I ever fucking did from that point forward. No, because literally going back in the LA Times, like years before the De La Hoya fight, this fool was talking shit on De La Hoya for fucking ever, bro.
Oh yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
Fernando Vargas hated that guy. Like he was always like, oh, not like De La Hoya. No, I mean, not like this fucking guy. Like he would, he was like when he fought Raul Marquez, he's
Yeah.
like giving props to Marquez, but he's like, not like this fucking guy over here. When, anyway, I'm not going to get into the whole fucking social dynamic of it, but
you got to think of it too, that like, so Vargas feels he's been slighted by Oscar early on, right? Now, also too, think about this. Oscar's a little bit older than him. Oscar came
exactly.
up
Yeah.
He has to deal with being an Oscar shadow, more or less, even though they're
Yeah,
not
is
like
Fernando Vargas the next Oscar De La Hoya?
he
And if you're
used to
Fernando
think
Vargas, you're
that.
probably like, shut the fuck up and stop asking me that.
Especially when the rumblings really started before the Olympics. That's when Vargas first like started making noise, started like getting a lot of ink when they found out he was making the 96 team, because everybody at that point too, it was hard to watch boxing. There was already rumblings and gripes about you couldn't really watch a lot of the fights on television because they weren't televising a lot of them. But that didn't mean the team wasn't getting a lot of ink. They were featured prominently, beforehand, previewed in Ring Magazine. They were featured in KO. They were talked about in various things, like, talking about, and Vargas was mentioned more than some of the others. Vargas, Mayweather, Antonio Tarver. Those were like the three guys, and David Reed to a degree maybe, but like those were the three core guys that a lot of people were saying expecting medals from, especially gold medals potentially. So yeah, Vargas was getting a lot of ink, especially too because like I said, he kind of, he's a Mexican American dude, good looking guy back then, boyish look. He kind of gave off the Oscar vibes. Same thing, East California, Southern California, whatever. Like he gives off the same vibes out there. It's easy to make those comparisons. Of course, people are going to make those comparisons, and especially with Oscar being so popular where he was. This is peak Oscar De La Hoya fandom right now. We're talking in the mid '90s. Everyone's going to be like, "Oh, the new Oscar, new Oscar." Vargas is seething from this now. All right, like he not only can he not stand this, but now he feels like he's in his shadow. This is his time. He wants to be his own person. Realistically, he is nothing like Oscar. He is complete opposite of him in personality and everything else. But the public doesn't really want to know that. They just want to compare them because they're both baby-faced looking good guys. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, and to the white public, it's just two Mexicans.
Yes.
That's all they say.
Exactly. Out, to the white public, they're just kind of like, well, they both look alike. They're both good-looking guys. Yada yada yada. Easy.
Oh, that name's ethnic.
Yeah. They were probably looking to see if Vargas had a mom that was going to die too, so they can tie that in as well. Like, I'm just,
ouch.
It's true, but like with some of the,
well, it's not wrong, but ouch.
But like, it's crazy to think with these things, but like that, Vargas was seething, man. He didn't want to deal with that shit, and so he's brewing all that stuff. The Olympics happen. It doesn't turn out as well as he had hoped. And he turns pro. He still turns pro with major fanfare. You know what I mean? Like he's still looked upon as a major player coming out of the Olympics. More so, again, he's still one of the top three guys. Well, Reed now as well. But Reed replaced Tarver, I would say. So now you had Reed, Mayweather, and Vargas as the three guys people were like the most excited to see turn pro. And Vargas turns pro. Lots of fanfare. He's featured prominently on television, featured prominently on HBO right away. Tuesday night fights, other things around then. Gets slotted into a title fight with Yuri Boy Campos and his 14th, 15th pro fight or something. And he was still young, man. He became the youngest junior middleweight champion ever at that point. He was like 20 years old or something. Like, fast tracked, absolutely fast tracked to a world title belt. And at that point, now everybody knew his feelings toward Oscar. Like, do not compare me to Oscar. Don't want to do anything like this. I'm my own person. I hate Oscar. The reasons why. Like, people still weren't sure the exact reason why. Like there was articles and things like that, but it wasn't like the internet was prominent where Vargas could speak, his opinion on it to everybody. So people were still a little bit in the dark as to why he hated him, but everybody kind of knew at this point, hey, I'm my own person. I want to fight for Oscar one day. Don't compare me to him. So we know how Vargas's career has panned out since then. The Trinidad fight, he rebuilt himself, yada, yada, yada. Eventually, though, man, the fight looked like it was never going to happen for a while because as much as Vargas wanted it, De La Hoya, because he hated Vargas as much as well, didn't want to give him that payday. And I know people, and there's a lot of fighters like that feel like, you know what?
Yeah, well, he was like, well, dude, he's talking shit. I'm not going to
exactly. I'm not going to give him a payday. Absolutely.
Why am I going to help him out? He's like, fuck him.
And I totally get that because he's not the first person that's like that. You know what I mean? Canelo kind of has that attitude to people today.
A lot of people feel as though that's why it was taking this long to fight Golovkin 3 times because he was like, well, he talks shit, so fuck him.
So yeah, when people are in that position where they can kind of pull those type of plays, they're gonna do that. Really, man, fuck you. I'm not gonna give you that chance. I'm gonna fight so and so and so and so and so and so and keep it pushing. Eventually, though, it's clamoring and the fight ends up happening. What was it, in 2002? And at this point, you know what I mean? It's a very, very hot fight, bro. Like both guys, they both lost a couple of times. You know what I mean? The luster is off of where they were prominently at one point, but I mean, you remember this, dude. That everyone was still really excited. They knew this was going to be like a war. I mean, De La Hoya was favored, and most people figured that De La Hoya would win. But like, you had to be excited for it because you just knew the hatred that Vargas was exuding. And then when Vargas was before the fight showing off his new body and talking about how much he was working out,
he was in great shape. He'd obviously been training hard.
Man, he looked, for a guy who never really was body beautiful like that. Like Vargas always had the Chavez, Tony Ayala Jr. type body where like he was in shape, but he was never ripped. You know what I mean? He always looked he love handles.
And in boxing, you don't necessarily, you could go 12 rounds and not be ripped. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with
I'm just saying he had as
yeah.
opposed to having a Tim Bradley body, he looked like more like a Chavez body, which suited him. And all of a sudden now he's looking like Bradley.
Yeah, it's fool's taking off his shirt looking like Edison Miranda. Like,
I'm talking had an 8-pack over here, shredded arms, man. The whole thing, dude. The cuts in his arms, the glue, all this shit you would see. And you're like, wait, what? And you see him with his strength and conditioning.
That fool was even flexing his bangs.
Bro, like he was in insane shape. And everyone was just like, I'm sure there was a lot of eyebrows being raised, being like, wait a minute, this isn't Vargas's body suddenly looks a lot different than what we're used to being known. For the most part, the public who doesn't really think about those type of things or really give a shit either way, were really excited. They're like, oh man, Vargas are going to come. And I'm sure a lot of people, Vargas supporters, seeing Vargas the way he was looking for that fight, were very excited at the possibility of him whooping Oscar's ass. But
not to be, dude.
He was a great fight, man. Vargas tried early on, man, but
he did a good job. Like, he was swarming him. He was doing a good job. I think that it was not quite as effective as it looked at in the moment, because it was like, oh shit, like he's totally got Oscar on the ropes and he's swarming him and he's like pushing him around. But
it was like when Oscar had Floyd on the ropes, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
He looks like he's
once it settled down, it was like, oh, okay, all right, that was that shit. But yeah, dude, he did about everything that he could. Like he probably even fought too aggressively, really. He probably put too much into those first few rounds. He probably should have settled down, used his jab, etc. But like, that's not what he did. He was mad, fought mad, wound up absolutely blowing his fucking wad. And then when it came to, like the a little bit past the halfway point, dude, he didn't have nearly as much. And all it took was that one fucking that hook. That one hook was just like whap. He didn't even see it coming.
Slow motion drop.
Yeah. And then after that, just the old Oscar hits him with like the 90,000 punches.
Vintage Oscar just gets in there over and over and over with a flurry. And Vargas looking like Mr. T in Rocky 3 with his hands up, trying to block it with the head still like swiveling. There's nothing else you can do. It's just
yeah. Oh man.
And, Oscar, at the end of the day, and then we found out afterwards that Vargas basically tested for every steroid in the book, giving him a double L in that fight.
he pissed hot for nandrolone, which is like in the steroid world, is like a super old school steroid. That shit motherfuckers were using in like the 60s.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like, and so it's like to get popped on a piss test in like the 2000s for fucking
using the same shit that guys like superstar Billy Graham and them used to use in
that's
WWF.
just, yeah, I mean, that just suggests that you just are stupid, you know. So
Totally.
I mean,
absolute psychopath.
and you took the fucking L on top of it, dude. And he got suspended for however long it was, like a year or whatever.
Mhm.
And
His career never recovered from that.
no,
Nothing
no.
recovered from that. No. He can't, you know, and for like Vargas is one of those guys that like he had such a high profile name that he would never like kind of not be a star. But anytime he stepped up, man, he lost pretty emphatically. He fought Shane Mosley. Um, both times got stopped. First fight was better than the second, but that second one kind of sealed the fate on his career because what was that, one shot and the same thing slide out again?
Yeah, dude. At least in the first fight, he had an argument because his eye was all fucked up.
Yeah.
And he was doing pretty good and coming on toward the end of the fight too. But then, you know, the second fight was like that first fight was all he had. He had gotten so out of shape between fights. Like it was like it happened too many times. It was like after that it would. I mean, I'm not trying to talk
He
shit.
always would say
like
that he would be completely out of shape, and then he'd be interviewed and he would talk about how he was in shape.
Dude, he was
like,
there were a couple times where he was like big.
When I saw him at the Mayorga press conference, the second one, not the one where the crazy fiasco, this one had a minor fiasco. He walks in there and it's summertime and it's pretty hot out, I remember. And he's wearing like one of those like silk, probably designer button, like a Versace button down shirt or something like that, Gucci, one of them shits. But it's like a silk shirt that, you know, definitely something that you would sweat through in the summertime. You wearing that in New York, all the humidity. And Vargas is a dude, you can tell he's big at this point. Like, you know, he probably just started training, but he's thick. And you just see like the sweat beating down the side of his head, man. And it looked like, you know, coming down his forehead, all the other stuff, like he was pouring it out on him. And then he had the nerve to say, after he comes in clearly out of shape when he weighed in for the fight in November, because it was around Thanksgiving time, he was like, oh, yeah, man, I'm in great shape. I'm already in shape. I'm going to go and enjoy Thanksgiving dinner now. You know, I'm going to eat some turkey and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what do you mean? You got like a fight tomorrow. You got to go over there and probably fucking wipe
off turkey.
Word. Looks like you're sweating Crisco and you're over there talking about how you're going to eat turkey and mashed potatoes and fucking candied yams and all this stuff, Vargas. You nut.
Terrible, dude. Ugh. Yeah.
Well, yeah, man, you had to bring that up because that was like the way he was talking so much crap on the lead up for that fight.
Yeah, dude, for real though. I mean, that's and on top of that, like I said, it happened more than once, although that was the more epic time for sure.
Yeah.
But Vargas, unfortunately, he's just like a shit talker by nature. I think so. It's like you can take the L after talking shit sooner or later.
A very emotional guy, very tough, emotional guy. Not a bad thing to have as a trait for a fighter, but you know.
That's for sure. Well, do you remember real quick? I think it might have been the rematch, the Shane Mosley rematch, when Jin Mosley and
his
wife were getting into it and shit. Oh fuck, bro.
You know, you don't want to mess with Jin either. She seems like a scary woman. I guess Vargas's wife was getting really loud and Jin just went like this, right? With the finger waved her over.
Pass.
I would have been totally down for them two to fight. Absolutely.
Fuck it, yeah. Just have the husbands fight, and then have the wives fight on the undercard. Why not?
I'm totally down for that. That would have been amazing. Hell yeah.
Well, awkward as fuck if one loses and one wins, though. But like that car ride home is gonna be rough.
Oh yeah, man. I don't know. Yeah,
that's a rough car ride home, bro.
Like when Chappelle said that him and his wife went to the Pacquiao fight. Pacquiao Mayweather fight, and they said it was a quiet car ride home.
So it was a good fight, huh? It's like
she did, yeah. He said his wife had nothing to say.
No. Dude, these poor souls who got served a fucking L after talking shit. You know, we mentioned many of them today. Although I before we go, first of all, thank you, of course, because it's always a great time, bro. But before we go, I was gonna say I hadn't in a while, and I do want to kind of throw some shout outs out there because it's been a minute and there have been a number of new subscribers, new listeners who have popped up and said hey, thank you, and have been really cool, which I really appreciate. I know it kind of lifts your spirits to hearing that people are
Absolutely.
listening and enjoying it. So anyway, Thomas Delmore, he sent me a DM the other day saying thank you, appreciate him listening because I've known him through Twitter for a long time.
Yeah, sure.
Paulo Vega, the dude is like the retweeting master when it comes to boxing, but he's helped us out in that regard a number of different times. Fred Ahrens, of course, Reggie Dunlop, dude's always listening in. Ted Coggs, also always listening in.
Donovan,
Let's see who else. Mark Nelson. Let's see. Joseph Godfrey. Lee Gormley, of course. Lee is always retweeting our shit. So Lee, appreciate you. Chris Dowdle. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm like leaving out a ton of people. I was just kind of really briefly going over the mentions from the Knuckles and Gloves account, but also fairly important. I did want to say one last thing para los oyentes y también los espectadores que hablan en español. Pues hay un podcast de historia del boxeo en español que se llama Libra por Libra y es presentado por Luis Fuentes y Jorge Lera. Uno de los últimos episodios del podcast trata sobre Dick Tiger, el gran campeón de Nigeria. Pero si les gustan este podcast, si disfrutan la historia como nosotros, pues también disfrutarán del podcast Libra por Libra. En el episodio del Dick Tiger hablan de la mayor importancia de los títulos británicos y pues en décadas pasadas y de algunas de las tradiciones culturales de los pueblos de Nigeria, pues mucho más. Así que les invito a suscribirse al podcast de Libra por Libra y seguirlos en las redes sociales y a seguirlos, pues Luis Fuentes y Jorge Lera. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. And if you did not speak Spanish, well, I guess that wasn't for you, but any Spanish speaking listeners, and I guess if you're trying to practice your Spanish, there's a podcast called Libra por Libra. It's written Libra ex Libra. That's totally in Spanish and hosted by Jorge Lera and Luis Fuentes. And they also do history podcasts. So again, if you're trying to practice your Spanish, get in on that shit. And I know my Spanish is not like great, so I apologize, but I do what I can. Anyway, as far as this show goes and cutting the shout out shorts, I appreciate everybody who listen in. I know Aris does too. I also appreciate everybody who watches the show. If you did listen in, go onto those podcast apps and subscribe and give us a rating. If you watched, subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate that. Leave some comments. There have been a lot more comments recently on videos. So that's really appreciated. If you have questions, whatever, please throw them out there. As far as social media goes, Knuckles and Gloves podcasts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, but we're also individually on Twitter. Aris Pina is on Twitter as Punch Zone Aris. Me, Patrick Connor, I'm there as Patrick M. Connor. Please say hello.
Totally.
We'll say hello later on, man.
Yeah, man. This was a great one as always.
Yeah, dude, for sure, man. Thanks so much.
Always,
all right, everybody. Later on.
Later.